record the computer. And I can minimize it again.
Okay.
Then
Hey.
pause it and break.
Okay. Hey, Josh and Kristen. We forgot to start. I thought the video had started already. We prayed, and I prayed for you. And now we're talking about what is conflict. We are only like 1 minute in, so you didn't miss much. We have up here disagreements and a clash of agendas. All right, what else?
I feel like it's a loaded question.
I guess just sin. basically.
Sin?
Yeah.
What else? Maybe think what kinds?
Lying.
Lying. I think it's L-Y-I-N-G. I'm not a good speller. That's
I don't even know the difference.
why I always type. 'Cause it
Like
fixes it.
small things like different beliefs can also cause
Okay,
that.
beliefs.
I think gossip.
Gossip.
Yeah.
What gets people arguing, fighting, mistrusting each other. I'm gonna add this one.
Yeah. In like a church context, power.
Power. You think it's only church?
No, it's everywhere, but a lot in church too.
Yeah, it does happen in church, right? All the stuff happens in church. All the things. I took a church history class, and after the second chapter, I started writing in the paragraph or writing in the margins this symbol when there was a money problem, and this symbol when it was sex.
Oh,
And I wrote 50 of them in the book because
yeah.
money and sex creates conflict. What else?
See, I see those in different categories. I see, gossip and agendas and disagreement in separate categories as money and sex. Because it's like just blatant sin, and the others might be character flaws that you need correction.
But do they start conflict?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. I know churches that have split because the pastor spent money on something people disagreed with. Or the board paid him too much money. Any other thoughts? Why does paint color cause conflicts?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your song choices ever cause conflict?
I don't think that yet.
Not yet?
No.
Okay.
So I have noticed that we went to visit Robert's family recently in California, and his uncle's like 85, and he's been in the church since 47 or something. I mean, since he was a real little kid. He thinks he doesn't realize this, but he thinks he owns the church.
Yes.
So everything they do that he doesn't agree with anything because he's not controlling it anymore.
Control.
Mhm.
Maybe it goes with power, but it's maybe different. Like his uncle, I don't know who he is in the hierarchy. He may not have any power, but he wants control.
Well, he always has until recently, and it's causing him a lot of grief that he can't control anymore.
Yeah. I mentioned music, so I'm going to write it.
It's a good one.
I mean, these songs are too modern. There's too much about me. The words are confusing. That poetry is misunderstanding. The drums are too loud. I want an organ. I want a piano. Why don't we have guitars? Like
Things.
all of them. Too many new songs, not enough new songs. Any other? Maybe this is a good thought. What has caused you conflict recently with someone else?
I know church drama can.
Yeah.
obviously
What
cause-
are some church dramas?
Yeah, I see that with the clash of agendas, because there are some people that have been there since the church
Totally.
started, and they think that they need to be involved in everything and do everything and direct everything and
Right.
influence everything.
Or some people just have egos.
Yeah, ego, pride.
I'd say division also, like within the church can cause.
What?
not cause-
Yeah, what causes division?
Usually like
What-
gossip, a lot
okay.
of
Yeah.
rumors,
Rumors.
leaving people out of a lot of things.
Ah,
Like isolation.
Yeah.
isolation. So isolation is one side of the leaving people out, but the other side of it is, I don't know what you call that. I know there's a word for it, but
Like clicks.
Like
yeah,
like
or like just not
separating.
including people in the conversation, like making a decision or doing something and leaving someone out. I mean, that's
It's dismissive and it's, well, it keeps people in their place, so to speak, which is not in your place.
yeah. What else causes church division,
Disobedience.
drama, disobedience?
How about a lack of prayer?
Okay. I had somebody newcomer to our church this week, and she goes, "Do you guys?" So first of all, she's come 2 Sundays, and last Wednesday at our prayer meeting, we had a prayer for the election, and so we advertised it special. We have prayer meeting every Wednesday at 11, and we advertised that one special because it was going to be prayer for the election. She came to it. Then after that prayer meeting, her and I are having a meeting because she's new to the church, so we got together, and do you have any questions about the church? And she goes, "Do you guys have any prayer meetings?" And I was like, "Yeah, the one you came to, that one at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, that happens every week at 11 a.m." And she goes, "Oh, only in the day?" With this like sour face. And it's like, how many do I need to have and how many different times of day? Like,
That's funny.
I mean, so I think when you said this, you just meant spiritually speaking. People are in conflict because they aren't praying. They're not unified by the Spirit in prayer. But what I'm saying is, having a prayer meeting or not having a prayer meeting can create a conflict.
Yeah, you can. You're right.
I went to a church once. I visited 2 times. And both times, the only prayer that happened during the entire service was the worship music. And like maybe someone talking to God during the song. Like just spontaneously. There was no prayer. And I was like, wow, I would have a hard time going to this church and having it be my home church.
See, I've actually been praying about this a lot, not maybe in this vein, but I think it's 2 Corinthians 5:14 around there, I think, where it says that we basically submit ourselves to God, to the one who died for us. We become less and he
Yeah.
becomes greater. And if you get down to all of this, it's because our focus isn't on Jesus.
Yeah.
It's on ourselves or
Yep.
something else.
Yep. No Christ focus. That cross represents Christ. Anything else you want to add?
Like just goes along with music. A lot of conflict is like generational, depending on what it
Generational.
is.
I thought we might get there when she was talking about her uncle or generations. And it's like generational values,
Yeah.
generational perspectives, generational experiences.
Well, and then you get to the one above it, leaving people out, because if the focus is all on the older group with ties or all on the
Right.
younger group and leaving the older group out.
Yep.
There's a dysfunction there.
Yep. We've called them generation wars. Are there any other groups, like generations are a group? Are there other groups that get into conflict within a church? that you could say?
Maybe like in certain churches, there are people who are more like conservative values within the church.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put the word that exactly.
Maybe traditional
Yeah.
versus something.
Mhm.
What would that be? Yeah. Traditions, maybe.
I'd say change can also cause some conflict,
Mhm.
like not wanting to change as well.
Yep. Anytime there's change. The people who want to change, the people who don't want to change it. Traditions versus like non-traditions. Or different traditions. I mean, I feel like it can happen in ministries.
Mm.
Like the ministries versus each other.
Yeah.
Each other.
Um,
Like kids versus youth, women
Mhm.
versus men. Who gets the first Saturday of December for their Christmas event?
yeah. And another one in church context could be like when somebody who works there leaves or is fired or
Yeah.
stuff like that can also
Staff changes or
Yes.
transitions.
Yeah.
Or just, I mean, it could even just be staff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did they hire that person and not this person?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, it doesn't even have to be transitions. Or, well, I agree with JJ, not Pastor John.
Mm.
I'm on JJ's. Who's Apollos? Who's Paul? Following a person instead of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like coming with an agenda would be another.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what's happening with that lady I was telling you about. At that meeting, she had
Yeah.
12 things. Like she has an agenda of
She
what
had
church has to be.
A
And she's
checklist
looking
of
for
what-
that one.
Exactly.
Sorry.
So I was like, we agree with you there. We agree with you there. And I was like, I agree we have to have prayer, but we have one at 11 on Wednesdays. That's when it works. And that's when we do it. So if that doesn't work for you, then
Yeah.
I'm not going to start another one for Pat. Okay, I have a proposition to make. And you guys already probably understood this because you had a little bit of a hard time breaking it down. You wanted it to just be a few a few overarching categories.
Mhm.
And I think it is. So my theory is that conflict comes from sin in all of its forms.
Yep.
It comes from opinions. Things that aren't sins, but we have opinions about them. You know, how loud the music should be. The Bible doesn't, James 14:27, thou shalt have the volume at 93 decibels. There's nothing like that. Sin, opinions, change, and there's one thing missing. The agendas, the control, the pride. Well, pride's a sin, but leaving someone out. Dynamics. Like relational dynamics.
Yeah.
Do you think that all of these can fit into one of those?
Mhm.
When I go to write my book, I'm going to try and make this a word. But right now it's not a word. Docs, DOCS.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. We're the conflict docs. We're gonna medicate your conflict. So I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been pastoring as the lead pastor for 13 years. I've been through a lot of different conflicts. And I think every time it's one of those four things. Somebody sinned. Two people have differences of opinion. We changed something or are planning to change something. Or there's some dynamics, interpersonal dynamics at play. Like, I just don't like them. Or they tried to manipulate me. Or they're keeping me out, which isn't a sin necessarily, because it's like, well, you're a guy and it's women's ministry. You don't need to be involved, you know?
Yeah.
But I have an opinion. Well, okay, but you don't need to have an opinion. But there's other dynamics, manipulation, control, power. We'll talk about some of those things. So when it comes to managing conflict or resolving conflict, I think there's some general principles that can be applied to all of these different conflicts, you know, our attitude in Christ, our oneness in the gospel, all of that. But then there's going to be some particular ways that we have to handle these things differently, because a sin conflict is different than an opinion conflict. Because if we just have different opinions, but neither one of us is sinning, like, that's not the same.
Yeah.
Like, nobody has to apologize for their opinion. But if you've sinned against someone, you have to repent. Like, that's going to be necessary to happen. And then one of the other things, just talking at a high level here, and then we're going to get into some nitty gritty, is often, and the reason I saved dynamics for last was on purpose. And that is because there are dynamics at play in all of these conflicts. For example, if someone lies to me, that's a sin. And they can repent of that sin, but they were also manipulating me by lying. And that's a dynamic. But then there's this other thing that happens is if, let's just say, you mentioned lying, so I'm picking on JJ. If JJ lies to me and I'm really offended and it was a sin that JJ did against me, and he and I should reconcile, and he should repent of that sin and be sincere and do what he can to make restitution, and I should forgive him. But if he lies to me and then I go to the Facebook group and gossip, see, now we're getting into dynamics. I mean, gossip is a sin too, but now we're getting into relational dynamics where we are after each other. And the original sin of the lie is not what is actually maintaining the conflict or fueling the conflict. Now the conflict's being fueled by the dynamics that happened as a result of the original offense. And this is what I see as a pastor as one of the most complicating parts of navigating conflict, is it seems like there's always the first offense, and it is that first offense isn't handled correctly. And other dynamics come around that first offense, and it immediately gets so complicated where now the original offender sees themselves as a victim because the person they lied to is gossiping about them. And it's true. They shouldn't have gossiped about them. And so they are a victim in that sense, but they started it with their original lie, and they won't own that. They won't process that. They won't admit that. They'll just say, well, I'm a victim because so-and-so gossiped about me. Judy, I see you're
I took
thinking.
another class and it was about emotional intelligence,
Yes.
which honestly, I just like that name. I just liked it the first time I heard it. And I studied, but it was fascinating thought and a fascinating class because what they propose in there is that when something happens to you, you always take a deep breath and think about it and react to what's happening right now, because everybody has baggage.
Yeah.
So you might be reacting to something that happened years ago, but this reminded you of it.
Yeah.
And again, that was another life-changing thought to me, because how many times have we done that?
Yeah.
And not even learn it. So we could be overreacting. And then, but if they had given those classes on a biblical level, which unfortunately they didn't, but then you could go into love your neighbor as yourself. You could talk about forgiveness. There's a lot of things that you can do to mitigate those second steps, the dynamics that we're talking about.
Yes.
So are you reacting now? Are you reacting to something in your past? What is the biblical way to respond?
Correct.
Of course, those classes didn't do that.
Yeah.
But
But it's
they're a good,
necessary,
yes,
isn't it?
they're a good starting point on where to go once you realize it.
I just passed out our handout, and Kristen and Josh, you should have it in email. I emailed it over to you. Do you guys have pens? I see you have computers, and I didn't even think of that. I could have sent all of you this digitally instead of just Josh and Kristen. But, I knew we had a small group, so I didn't want to get too like I was speaking to a crowd.
Yeah, thank you.
You might like to fill it out. Is there another place we could find pens? Does anybody know? Oh, you guys have one? Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so right there at the beginning, what causes conflict? Sin, change, differences of opinion or culture, like differences of culture. And I should write that up there. Because culture affects our opinions. You know, like if you were raised in the inner city, you might love hip hop at church only because your culture loved hip hop. Or if you were raised in the country, you're like, why don't we sing more country songs at church? Because of your culture. But it's really an opinion. And then the dynamics. Dynamics include manipulation, control, stress, communication or lack of communication, unclear expectations, limited resources, competitiveness. Those are dynamics that surround groups of people that create conflict. Okay, so let's take a look at Romans 12. Romans 12. That's why I need my Bible or my computer. Because this isn't my computer that we're recording on. I should say, I think all of you know because I taught one class before, but I shouldn't assume you remember, is I don't want to just go through your Making Peace book and reteach all of those things again. You've read it. You've answered all the questions. You've completed a study guide. You're going to have to memorize that. And then you're going to do the test on that. So you have 4 experiences in this class. 3 of them are that book. The only one I'm in control of is the 4th one, which doesn't have to be that book. So my plan is not to lecture through that book at all. In fact, I'm going to make one reference to it later because I just have something to add to one part of it. But everything else that I'm going to teach today is like, I want to give you new information, other things to think about. And of course they overlap for sure, but these are going to be my views. I hinted earlier, like I could write a book on this topic and you're getting the one day teaching that may become a book someday because I have experience in this. I don't need to just tell you what the author said again. All right. So Romans 12, are you there? Okay. Are you guys, I don't know how your class culture is. Is it okay to have different ones of you read? Like, would some of you like to read the scripture? Okay. Awesome. Shall we divide it up like 9 through 13 and then 14 through 21 seems logical. Okay. Judy, you want to read 9 through 13 and then Cyan 14 through 21? Is that okay? Yeah, go for it.
Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good, be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality.
Bless those who persecute you. Bless them and don't curse them. Be happy with those who are happy. Be sad with those who are sad. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be arrogant, but be friendly to humble people. Don't think that you are smarter than you really are. Don't pay people back with evil for the evil they do to you. Focus your thoughts on those things that are considered noble. As much as it is possible, live in peace with everyone. Don't take revenge to your friends. Instead, let God's anger take care of it. After all, Scripture says, I alone have the right to take revenge. I will pay back, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. If you do this, you will make him feel guilty and ashamed. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil with good.
Beautiful. Romans, yes. Yeah. I think it was Luther who said it is the summit of the scriptures. Like the mountain peak. Thank God, Ben Luther. All right, so Romans 12, 9 through 21. Do you think God's word has something to say about conflict?
Yes.
Okay, so just a few discussion questions to open our minds for this for today. So, what does this scripture say about how we should respond to those we have conflict with? Like, what should our response to them be?
Just blessing those who persecute you is what it says in 14.
Yeah,
Because I mean, the people that killed Jesus, he even prayed for them and said, Father, forgive them.
yeah,
I think even this is kind of talking to listen to other people.
yeah,
To see their perspective and where they're coming from too.
yeah,
When it says be happy with those who are happy, be sad with those who are sad, to
yeah,
relate to them, try.
right.
At least.
Yeah. So, how do you think weeping and rejoicing with people that we are? I mean, the context is community, conflict, differences. How does weeping and rejoicing with others help us in conflict?
It definitely shows that you're more personable when you can do stuff
Okay,
like that.
more
where you're able
personable.
to be more vulnerable, I guess.
Vulnerable. You hinted at it when you said listening.
Mhm.
How does rejoicing and weeping with people show that you're listening?
Well, it shows that you pay attention to
Mhm.
what they're saying.
Okay.
Definitely. And
That
not
you
just-
heard them.
Yeah, not just that you heard them, but that you are observing what
Yeah.
they're feeling as well.
So you hear them, you observe them, but if you weep with them,
What they're feeling.
yeah, like it's even beyond like, okay, fine, I hear you. It's wow, that is sad.
I'm thinking, and that's because the Lord's been dealing with me a lot lately, that there has to be the forgiveness factor in there someplace. Because if you are not walking in forgiveness
Yeah,
for yourself and other people, but you're not going to share their feeling and be able to weep with them.
yeah,
Because there's a blockage there.
right.
All you doing is remembering what they did, how mad you
Right.
made. That's how
Yeah.
you can function.
So by rejoicing and weeping with them, you're demonstrating forgiveness.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. So what should our attitude be in the midst? What should our attitude be in the midst of conflict?
You know, that last question in the study guide, it threw me because I've been kind of an aggressive person
Okay.
in conflict. And it must have been about 20 years ago. I don't even know, but it was a long time ago. And I was at work and I was right. I still think I'm right. And it was a conflict and everybody was dispersing, and just as clear as a bell, I heard the Lord say, Judy, relationships more important than being right.
Mhm.
And it was a clear word.
Yeah.
Since then, I haven't known what to do with it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it without being aggressive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm right.
Like your
But-
default is aggressiveness. Yeah.
It is. So I think, what's wrong with you people? You see this, I'm sure that comes through.
Yeah.
So now I just kind of keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to.
You're maybe a little more evasive because you're trying not to be aggressive.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think Paul is saying to that relationship's more important than being right?
I think so.
Okay. What other attitudes should we take in conflict from this Romans 12 passage?
Well, there's that buried at the end of 11 is serving the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah. Just to be patient in trouble.
Patient. Have a perspective that we're serving the Lord. Prioritize relationship.
And
That's
not a tit for tat.
vengeance.
Yeah, it's not there. You don't see that there at all.
Yeah.
There's humility and submission there. And it's
Yeah.
hard to submit to somebody you don't like and you think they're wrong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite verses that I turn to all the time in conflict is, as far as it depends on you, Brad, live peaceably. Like, as far as it depends on me, this is a opportunity for peace. And if the other person doesn't want to have peace, then that's not as far as it depends on me.
Yeah.
You know, like I can only do my part. And that attitude in conflict has served me well, because I can then do what I need to do in the midst of the conflict to bring about peace without carrying the burden of controlling them to make them have peace. Like I just have to have peace myself. And sometimes that brings peace to the whole thing, but sometimes it doesn't, because they aren't going to have peace, the person that I'm in conflict or the group or whatever. And it's not a tit for tat. And the only way you can control that is by you not getting vengeance,
Yeah.
not repaying evil with evil. That goes back to the lie. You lie, then I gossip about it.
Yeah.
That's tit for tat. Repaying evil with evil.
And isn't it interesting that that seems to be the natural response?
Definitely. It's our American culture. Like if the server at the drive-through window treats you bad, you go on social media and tell the world about it.
Yeah.
And then you shame them by videotaping them secretly.
Kind of like taught to be vengeful, like
Right.
vengeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And we defend people who are vengeful. Well, they were justified in doing that because somebody hurt them.
Just thinking about that, I don't know what made me, I think what made me think about that is the young women who have been killed by the illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
So if legally, if their fathers killed those illegal immigrants, they could go to prison.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Vengeance.
Vengeance.
Yeah.
And something so terrible like that, I'm not sure many people could control
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah. Yep. And there has been cases where stuff like that's happened, where, somebody learns that their child was raped by someone and they kill the person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening right now. A sheriff learned that the judge in his district had slept with his daughter and he shot him.
It's interesting how when sin starts, it kind of really blossoms.
Yes, it does.
Goes into a big mess.
Yep. And while we were enemies of God, he humbled himself and he took on the form of a servant and he died on a cross. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Someone has to interrupt the pattern of venge and conflict and evil for evil. Someone has to stop that cycle and be a peacemaker. Okay, 4 principles of peacemaking. Beautiful. You guys are so thoughtful. I love this. 4 principles of peacemaking. The gospel is a gospel of reconciliation, isn't it?
Yes.
Reconciled with God and with other people. So number 1, the first principle of peacemaking is glorify God. In the midst of conflict, if we're going to be a peacemaker, we have to be of the mindset that this is for God. Like my conflict with this person can glorify God. So however I handle this, let it be for God's glory. And so we have to be aware of God, that God is present in this situation.
Something kind of on that as well. When we think about like conflict with other people, especially like in churches and stuff like that, I think we have to take into consideration that if we don't handle it like how God says to,
Yeah.
we can potentially ruin somebody's relationship with God as well.
Right. Yeah.
Because a lot of church is
Yeah.
community.
Right.
Like the church is supposed to be.
Yeah.
So it can go both ways, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yep. Very good. 1 Corinthians 10:13. It's not on your notes, but it goes with point number 1. Paul is writing to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 10 about handling conflict and living in community. And they're fighting over what foods they should eat, what days they should celebrate, whether they can drink certain beverages that are offered at the temple or not. And so he's having this conversation with them about these conflicts. And he says, listen, in verse 31, 10:31. I love that this is 1 Corinthians 10:31, by the way, because what just happened on 10:31? October 31st. It's Halloween. And there's so much conflict in the church over Halloween. And this verse answers the question about the conflict over Halloween. Eat whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. We got to have glory of God mindset in the midst of conflict and making peace. And I have in your notes there, peace with God. If you're a peacemaker, you're going to have to be at peace with God. And as church leaders, as worship leaders, as pastors, as leaders in your churches, like God is glorified in your leadership at times of conflict. And one of the things that I've observed is when I am not glorifying God in a conflict, I don't have peace with God. Because when I lay my head down on the pillow, God's talking to me and going, Brad, you're not handling this right. I'm not getting glory in this situation. You're trying to get glory for yourself. Look at how you're bickering with them. Look how you're trying to get revenge. You just gossiped about it, you know, and now I'm sinning against God. And so I have no peace with God. And how am I going to have peace with the person I have conflict with if I don't have peace with God? So I have to be able, in the midst of conflict, to stand before God and say, I am doing this. As far as it depends on me, I am at peace. And that starts at being in peace with God. And of course, that means salvation. So one of the hardest conflicts to resolve is between believer and unbeliever. I mean, but as far as it depends on me, I'm going to be at peace. But if they come at me, that's on them. Okay. Number 2. I don't know if you recognize this, but they all start with G's. Glorify God. Number 2, get the log out. Do you know what that means? Log, L-O-G, get the log out. Confess your part. Matthew 7:4. Jesus says, don't judge your neighbor who has a speck of sawdust in his eye. First, take the log out of your own eye. And then you will be able to see clearly to take the speck of dust out of your brother's eye. So what this is, get the log out. First, you have peace with God. Second is peace within. Because if I have the log in my own eye and I try to help JJ get a speck of dust out of his eye, I've got an obstacle that isn't of his making. And maybe that speck of dust in his eye is a sin. But I've got this huge sin in my own life that is keeping me from serving and loving JJ and being in relationship and in peace with him. And it's of my own doing. So the first thing we have to do in conflict is glorify God. The second thing is we got to confess our own part. We have to be willing to say, look, I have a role to play in this conflict. And whatever it is, I didn't include you in the decision and you should have been included in the decision. I changed things without telling you they were going to change. This happened to me yesterday. Our men's ministry had a bowling night last night. And 2 weeks ago, when it was time to book the reservation at the bowling alley, I only had 2 people signed up. And it was me and one of my staff members. And I'm like, this isn't going to be the big event I thought it was going to be. And so I kind of put off booking because I'm like, I'm not going to book the party room when it's only going to be a small group of people. Turns out in the end, there were 24 of us there, and I probably could have had 30 in the end. But I didn't know that 2 weeks ago. So by last Sunday, a week out, I had like 8 more or 10 more sign up. So we were like at 12. And so I called the bowling alley and I knew 6 bowlers per lane. So I'm like, okay, we want to get 3 lanes. And they're like, oh, well, it's it's inside the 7 day. Like you have to book events like this 7 days out, and it's not 7 days because it was Sunday. Well, it was Monday actually, and Friday was the event. But they're like, but we'll do it. So they did it, and they're like, what time? And I said 6 to 8. Went through all the stuff, and then Thursday night I realized it's not 6 to 8, it's 7 to 9. Oh no. So I reached out to the bowling alley and said, it's not 6 to 8. I don't know why I said that. I don't know where those numbers came from. It's 7 to 9. That's what we've been advertising the whole time. And she's like, okay, I'll send you a new contract. So Friday morning I get a new contract, but I didn't read it because I had already read the old contract. I was like, okay, good. I got a new one with the new times. I didn't even check that she got the new times. Signed the new contract. She sent the new contract to the bowling alley. She's just like the booking person. She's not the one at the bowling alley serving us. And it said 6 to 8. So at 6:45 last night, they're calling me. Where are you? You're 45 minutes late. I'm like, no, it doesn't start till 7. I'm in the parking lot. I'm about to walk in. And they're like, no, the contract says 6 to 8. And I'm like, I thought she changed it. I got a new contract this morning to fix this problem. And he's like, no, it doesn't. And I'm like, I am so sorry. This is totally my fault. Like I said the wrong time, and now look where we are. And he's like, it's okay. We'll cover you guys. And then he started apologizing, going, that's our fault. I'm sure we just dropped the ball. He's like, we'll give you free beverages. And so gave all 24 of us free beverages, all we can drink. And I was like, also, sorry, I signed up for 18 people and I have 24. And he's like, it's okay. Just add them. We won't even bill you because we messed up the time. And it's like, the time mess up wasn't your fault. But I confessed my part. I had a log in this conflict. And I could have gotten really mad at the woman who did the contract because she sent me a new one to fix the time. And so, I feel like she did me wrong, but I also did them wrong because I didn't tell them the time. I booked within 7 days instead of 7 days in advance. Like I had to confess my part. And that gave me peace within. Like, look, I'm owning myself in the thing that I brought to this relationship, the dynamics that I caused. I don't think I sinned. It wasn't a difference of opinion, but I did change something and there were dynamics at play and I didn't communicate well. And that lack of communication messed this up. And I didn't follow my own, knowledge that you got to read a contract. And so I had a role to play. And if I push that off onto them, then I don't have peace within. I'm not actually being honest about what's wrong with Brad. I don't think they would have been. Yeah. And then to make matters worse, because we had deposit that we paid at the beginning, food that we paid for. When we went to pay for the bowling at the end, the bank blocked our card because they're like, somebody's using your card and they're like doing multiple purchases at the same place. It's a scam. So I had to call the bank, 800 number on hold. Sorry, my card's declined. Ah. Yeah. Okay. So this is what happens. So God awareness, glorify God. Number 2, get the log out and have peace within. Number 3, gently restore. So this is where the restoration comes back, to be gentle. Galatians 6:1 goes with this. Galatians 6:1. You who are spiritual should it says, if any one of you wanders away, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. And it has to do with sin and conflict offense. If somebody has offended you and gone away, if they are at conflict and at distance from you, you who are spiritual should go to that person and gently restore them back. You can't do that if you are not glorifying God and you aren't at peace with what you did in the situation. Because if you haven't done those things, when you try to restore them, it's going to be all about what they did, the wrong they committed, the hurt that they caused. Where if you can own your own stuff and say, I'm going to glorify God in this situation, then you can have peace with God, peace within, and finally peace with others. That's that third peace with. That's on number 3. You probably figured that out.
Number 2, what was number 2?
Get the log out. Oh, peace within yourself. Yep. Peace with God, peace within, peace with others. So you're gently restoring them, just lovingly, compassionately owning your own stuff. hey, look, man, we got to make this relationship work. You matter to me. And I don't want this thing that happened between us to break this relationship. I don't want it to ruin your faith in God. I don't want your kids to see this and think that church is a place where people fight. Like, let's resolve this so that you and I can look each other in the eye. I mean, there's people in this world that, as far as it depends on me, I'm at peace with them. But when they see me at the grocery store, they go the other way because they haven't dealt right with me. And I don't want that between us. So how can we restore this? How can we make this right and come together? Yeah, it's hard with non-Christians. Those are a lot of times the people who turn away. Yeah. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but yeah, they may not be at peace with you. And like, is there peace with evil? Can you have peace with evil? So if someone's choosing evil, like you can't okay. I might get on a little bit of a political soapbox right here, but what happens when you compromise with evil is you include evil. Like, no compromise. You can't compromise with evil. You can only compromise with good. But yeah, anyway.
Your spirit probably won't settle with if you
Yeah.
decide to.
Yeah.
Even if you do compromise, nothing's gonna settle with you.
Right.
Way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, how can I compromise with a murderer about whether we should murder people? Well, okay, let's not murder. Like, I don't think we should murder them, but we can harm them greatly. Like, no, we can't do that either. Well, we'll just talk bad about them. And the murderer's like, no, we need to murder them. It's like, no, I can't do that. Like, I can't compromise with you. There's no coming together. And so as far as it depends on me, I got to be at peace with God and peace with him. And then gently restore them. And this class is conflict resolution in the church, like we're talking about with believers. That's what we're trying to talk about. So, number 4, go and be reconciled. So you're gently restoring them. You're trying to win this person back. And then the 4th thing is go and be reconciled. In Matthew 5, Jesus is talking, and he says, if you come to offer your gift in worship to God, and when you bring your gift to the altar, you remember that you have an offense with your brother, what should you do?
Leave your offering there and go and get.
Yeah. Leave your offering and go and get restored, and then come back and offer your gift. So that's why this is the 4th step. Glorify God, get the log out, gently restore, and then go and be reconciled to the person. Like, get this taken care of. We've already hinted at this. The next thing on your notes is conflict is an opportunity. And we've already really talked about this. But when you're in conflict, many more people are watching you. They're watching you. One of the things I say to my staff and I say to myself is the way I'm treating this person that I have conflict, the way I'm handling this conflict, I am telegraphing, I am teaching my entire church how they will be treated if we get in conflict. The other thing I'm doing is I'm teaching and telegraphing to my staff in church how I should be treated when they're in conflict with me, because I'm the leader, I'm the pastor. So when I make a decision, when I have a staff person recently who was not carrying their load, they were only working half their scheduled shifts. They were spiritually distant from God. They were behaviorally living in sin. And it was something that everybody was aware of. And they were on our staff. It's like, how do I handle this situation? We are in conflict. And so it was gentle. It was conversations. It was trying to be resolved. It was trying to show them and convince them that this is hurting the team. It's hurting your teammates. Okay, yes, I know, but I have this problem in my life. I'm trying to get this. Okay, so here's a mentor. You're going to meet with that mentor once a week, and that person's going to help you through those problems in your life so that you can get these things straightened out. Oh, thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Pastor. So first meeting, great. Everything's great. Second meeting, they didn't show up. Third meeting, didn't show up. Stopped answering my text messages. Isn't even telling me they're not coming anymore. Okay, you're not meeting with your mentor. Like we worked and worked and worked over 8 months with this person to try and keep them, but they wouldn't change. So as far as but what I did in that is I told my whole staff, I showed my whole church that when this is happening, this is how we handle each other. We try to win each other back. We try to help each other gently bring them back onto the right track, help get them out of sin. And people were coming up to me and like, Pastor, you are handling this so well. I'm so proud of our church. Like, thank you for being someone who actually shows your care for people and doesn't just toss them aside at the first whim of something that is suspicious. Like, my staff now knows that if they ever get themselves into a situation like that person, that I'm going to love and care for them and we're going to try and win them back. Where if I had just 8 months ago went, what? You're done. Then I wouldn't have been at peace with that. God wouldn't have been at peace with that. I had to leave my offering and go and try and win this person back. So we have to be aware who's watching.
Question about that though, because there's degrees and everything you have about those degrees.
And the thing I'm talking about was degrees.
So where's the cutoff? How do you know when there's a cutoff? If it's so egregious?
Good question. What do you guys think? How do you know?
I think maybe like it depends on, because one usually that's a good question. I guess it maybe also depends the amount of people you hurt.
Yeah.
I guess
Okay.
would be a good way to start.
Maybe you could say like how many people you hurt, how great the damage is
Yeah.
that's being done, if it will be repairable, if you continue how things are.
Yeah.
One of the things I considered is how it was hurting the people in the church and if it was. And the things we were talking about wasn't really hurting anyone in the church. Like they weren't raping a kid in our kids ministry. Like if it was that, it would have been, bye,
Yeah.
you're done.
So
But-
if it's- let's say.
But there could have been redemption after that still.
Yes.
But it would have been a lot different process. This person just wasn't as close to God as they needed to be. And they were making behavior choices in their life
So
that were affecting them, but it wasn't sinning or hurting other people. But they were just involved in activities in their own personal life that were unbecoming of a Christian.
So if it's hurting other people and or maybe illegal.
Illegal, you
have
got to call the
all
cops.
the Cops in, then
Yeah.
it's done.
And they'll probably be released immediately while the investigation continues.
And
Yeah.
that could be, it could be sexual, but it could be embezzling.
Embezzling.
There's lots of things.
That's right. I think another factor is, and the degree is one of the factors. Another factor is where are they? Are they like this person was admitting the things? They're like, yes, I'm doing this. I don't want to do this. Like they were saying to us that they wanted to get better. Now, what happened is over 8 months, we learned that they were saying that, but they really weren't doing that. They weren't taking us up on the opportunities to do better and to grow. And they were young. It's just one of those situations. They didn't have a lot of power and influence either. There were other leaders around them that carried the load, but they were, they were an assistant staff person. So their leader was doing a great job. So I knew it wasn't going to affect the ministry. It did affect us, but that's okay. Like I would rather take that pain and how it affected us, because it could have worked. Like we could have redeemed that person and maybe we still can. I don't know. I hope so. So Josh is in our class and he knows who I'm talking about. So I don't want to be gossipy, but it's a real thing that we all are going to have to deal with. What happens when your volunteer guitar player is a drunk on Saturday nights and then comes to church Sunday morning hungover? Like you're going to have to deal with that. Do you just immediately disregard them or do you try? Because people are watching.
That's a hard one, actually.
Yep. And you're going to have to, next step, how do we reflect? So this is another opportunity. This is the continuation of it. So how do we reflect God in this conflict that will help people see what humility, graciousness, kindness, forgiveness, and repentance are? Because while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't wait for us to get our act together before he died for us. But then once he saved us, he says, go and sin no more, right?
Yes.
So-
I believe that.
So how do we reflect God in this conflict so those people who are watching will see that we're humble, that we're gracious, that we're kind, that we're forgiving, but that we repent when we do something wrong? And ultimately, it came down to the fact that this person wasn't repenting. They were saying it with their mouth, but they weren't doing it with their life. And so, we had to ask her to take a break, and she's in the middle of that break right now. So, okay. Causes of conflict, principles for peacemaking, and the opportunity. Okay. So in the midst of all of these conflicts, there is this idea in the literature called the slippery slope of conflict. I want you to, I was going to draw it actually. That's a Sharpie up here. That's dangerous. I almost grabbed a Sharpie. No, the orange one doesn't work. Conflict. On one side of the conflict, we have a slippery slope, don't we? And on the other side, I drew this. And on the other side, we have a slippery slope. So there's two sides to how we can handle conflict that both become a slippery slope in making conflict unresolvable. But there are some principles in the middle at the top of that where it's not slippery, it's solid, it's sure. Okay. So that's what those three columns are on your notes. So the left column is this side, let's say. Right column's this side, and the center one is this. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to have you fill in your table in that order, left, right, and then middle. So on the left side, up at the top, we have denial. We're not in conflict. Denial. This is where you don't really admit that there's a difference. You're just trying to keep peace. And so you're just going to pretend like nothing's happening. But once you start doing that, you enter the top edges of this slippery slope. And what eventually happens is if you're denying it and not facing the reality that there is a conflict, then you're going to flee from the conflict. And rather than facing it, rather than dealing with it, rather than trying to resolve it, you're just going to distance yourself from that person. You're going to stop talking to them. You're going to sit on the other side of the room. You're going to stop going to the church if it's with the pastor or a leader or something. And if it's with your spouse, you're just going to not talk to them anymore. Because you're not willing to deal with the conflict how you should deal with it. And so you're in this escape slippery slope. And it started by denying it and then distancing yourself from it by fleeing. And the ultimate manifestation of this in a person's life is they distance themselves from the conflict so much that they suicide. They take their own life because they're like, I'm in conflict with all these people. I can't deal with it. I have to get out of this conflict. And the only path is kill myself. So on the other side is the attack response. This is escape. Over here is the attack response. And it starts off gentle. Like that's why it's a slippery slope, right? Is up here, it's just verbally. You just verbally attack them. You're so dumb. You're an idiot. Why would you think that? Like, it's just angry words. That's where it starts. But then it can become violent, which we're going to ultimately get to. But then you can start to litigate. Like, I'm going to take you to court. I'm suing you. I'm coming after you for this. Or like we talked about earlier, the tit for tat, the vengeance part of it. And where Suicide is the way to get yourself out of it. When you're attacking the other person, what's the other extreme? Murder. You kill them. You destroy them. Because the only way to solve this conflict is to defeat that enemy. War. Right? Either you surrender and allow them to kill you, or you murder them. So what is the biblical way that's in the middle? There are 6 biblical responses that are solid ground for conflict. I love what Galatians 6:1 says. Watch yourself lest you fall. It's at the top of that chart. So watch yourself. If you get into this escape thing where you're denying it and fleeing and distancing, or if you get into attack mode, you got to watch yourself and go, oh, I got to get back. I'm headed to one side or the other. So these are the 6 principles of biblical responses. Number 1, overlook minor offenses. The New Testament, I should have written down where it is, says, don't pick up offenses. You know why you have to pick up offenses sometimes is because they're so small that they are laying on the ground. People are trampling over them, but you decide to pick it up. It's like, don't pick up small offenses. Now, it's important to say small offenses. Like, we're not talking about big ones, but there are some things where it's like, you don't have to get all upset. Like, it's not worth the fight. Why are you going to make that an offense to separate you? It's such a small thing. I had a woman get mad at me one time as pastor. She wrote me this nasty text message where she said all kinds of horrible things. So I don't know why she felt all of those things, but the offense was you looked me in the eyes Sunday morning and didn't say hello or shake my hand, but you looked me in the eyes. So she thought like I intentionally looked at her and then ignored her.
Dismissed you.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I didn't feel that way at all. And so all I could do was apologize. I mean, I was just like, I am so sorry. And now she's one of my greatest friends. Like she just, for whatever reason that day, she picked up that small thing and now we're buds. You know, she loves me. I love her. And it's been great. But that was a minor offense, you know, like, why did she allow that? You looking at me? It reminds me of that like thing from the 90s. Like, you looking at me? You look at me, I'm going to kill you.
People that kind of work together, and she has gotten real. She picks at you and says mean things.
Yeah.
It's not, little snarky things. Well, her husband, she's having problems with her husband. He doesn't want to come to church. Her granddaughter took off and ran away.
Yeah.
Her daughter was in the hospital and they thought she had cancer. But
Oh my.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of things, and I'm thinking that's probably explaining it.
Yeah, she's under stress.
Yeah.
There's a dynamic going on here, and it doesn't have to be divisive.
No.
I can look past it. I don't know how many of you are ever going to be parents, but when you start parenting a 14, 15, and 6-year-old, you've got to overlook minor offenses. Like, they're just moody. They say things that are nasty that they shouldn't say. They didn't say when they were 12, and they won't say when they're 18. But they're going through that hormonal stuff in that middle teen years. And like my wife and I, we just like look at each other and are like, what is happening? And then we just carry on. If we let every single one of those things become a reason for us to ground her, discipline her, take something away, like the girl would be in an empty bedroom 24/7 because we would take everything away and we would lock her up permanently because she just does it all the time. But we know it's a stage of life. So if somebody's going through something hard and they're just, a little irritable, like, don't pick up those minor offenses. Like, let them lie. It's fine. Okay. Then the second thing is you begin to negotiate. You can't flee the situation or deny the situation, and you can't attack the person. You negotiate. And there's some great strategies in your book for how to negotiate. So hopefully you're learning those things. And in the midst of that negotiation, you're trying to come to a resolution. And that means that there's going to have to be an an extension of forgiveness. And that's the next bullet there. The third thing is forgiveness. You're going to have to find it in your heart to forgive. And, with that comes repentance. So maybe you could say forgiveness/repentance. And those two things come together. If one party repents and the other won't forgive, usually the conflict isn't resolved. And if one party's willing to forgive, but the other one doesn't repent, then that usually keeps the conflict going. It really takes both, right? The fourth one is mediation. Mediation, and we're going to look at Matthew 18 later, is where you bring in someone else to judge this situation. Like the two of us have negotiated this one-on-one. We can't come to a resolution. And so we need a mediator to come and sit in this, hear both sides, and render like, here's the problem. You lied, you gossiped. So you should apologize for that. You should repent of that. And then can you forgive them of gossiping? Can you forgive them of lying? And that person helps mediate it. If mediation doesn't work, then the next step of mediation is arbitration. And that's the fifth bullet there, arbitration. Mediation and arbitration in America are actually legal processes that keep you out of court. So over here on the slippery slope of the attack side is litigation, where you're suing someone. Mm-hmm. Mediation and arbitration are actually legal processes that don't involve the court. And what an arbiter does is they are like a mediator. They hear both sides, but then an arbiter goes here. The arbiter makes a judgment about what needs to be done to make it right. So they're like, you need to pay them $6,000. That's what will make it right, or whatever the thing is. I have a friend who was a minister up in Washington, and he got trapped in a addiction to pornography. And he would go to church to work on his sermons at night, and he would work on his sermons for 30 minutes and then watch porn for more time. And, his wife was at home taking care of the kids, cleaning the house, doing sacrificial things for her husband because he was working on a sermon. And he wasn't working on a sermon. So he was caught, and he wanted to repent. He wanted to make things right. And what that meant for him was that he had to rebuild trust with his wife, because she had totally been betrayed. She had been doing these sacrificial things for the kingdom of God because her husband was a preacher. And he used that to take advantage of her so that he could go and feed this porn addiction. So they went to a mediator because he wanted to make it right. And she was like, well, I'm willing to make it right, but there's a lot that's going to have to happen for me to feel trust in you again. And she was kind of vengeful, but she was willing to do it. And so the two of them went and sat with this person, and they came up with a plan. And it included for a year, he couldn't have electronic devices connected to the internet. And so he had to go back to using books to prepare for sermons and stuff. And he had to do it at home in the office where she could see. And they installed a new door on the office that was glass. So he was in there and could be seen all the time. And then when he did get a phone or electronic device, there's technology out there where you can like mirror it. And so whatever he did, she could see. And she had permission, like had all of his passwords. She read, and she did. Like she knew that if I was ever going to trust you again, I am going to have to read everything you do. And so she would sit down at night and read all of his emails, textbook. He actually got rid of Facebook. Still doesn't have Facebook, like even now, because he got rid of all that stuff. But there was a plan in place, and he was able to do it, and she was able to do it. They stayed married. It was a long road, years. And I know this couple, and they're doing great. I mean, I'm sure they have problems, but like they have kept it together. They have gone through it. So mediation is me and you. Negotiation is me and you. Mediation is bring a couple of witnesses. Arbitration is bring a decision maker. And then the last step is church discipline. And that is, okay, we couldn't figure it out, so the church will discipline you. And Jesus you'll read about it in just a minute after our break. Matthew 18, Jesus says, treat them like an unbeliever. Paul says, kick them out of the church. Have no fellowship with them any longer. And sometimes that happens. But it happened in the spirit of, as far as it depends on me, I'm going to live at peace. You didn't murder them. You're like, man, we tried so hard. We wanted this to work, but they wouldn't. Like, we know they sinned. The arbitrator knows they sinned. The church knows they've sinned, but this person won't say, I sinned. So you treat them like an unbeliever, you lose fellowship. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is if the person is not an authentic believer and they are attacking or trying to flee, once you hit mediation, they ditch. They self-remove because they don't want to go through it. They know they're wrong. And so they're like, I'm not going to keep going through this process. So only 2 times in my whole ministry career have we ever got to arbitration. And by the time we got to that, the person left. I never have had to kick someone out of the church because they kicked themselves out. They removed themselves. But we were trying. We wanted it to be made right. You know, and we had apologized for our part and we were trying to do what we could to redeem them, but they were holding on to that grudge and wouldn't do it. Okay, we have a few more minutes. I'd like to get through stages that reveal idols of the heart. This comes from an author who writes on church discipline, and I really loved this idea of something that leads to conflict. So this is, I probably should have put this earlier. Now that I think about it, actually, I'm talking through it. It's like, oh, this should have been at the beginning. These are things that lead to conflict. So these are the stages that reveal an idol of the heart. And this author, his idea is that all conflict comes from an idol in the heart. And it could be a sin idol, but it could also be an opinion that you've made an idol. It can be a change that you want to make or a change that would disrupt an idol that you have. We used to call that the golden calf, you know, or the elephant in the room. And then dynamics that you have made an idol, like I'm in charge of the money. I have this, whatever. So everything that has become an idol, he says, is what has created conflict. That's his premise. And this is how he lays it out. Number 1, we have a desire. All of us have a desire. This is the top of page 2. And desires aren't bad. God gives us desires. Like the desire itself isn't bad, but the desire is something that we want. And desire can be bad. Like we can desire bad things. There's a lot of things I've desired in my life that are bad. Sometimes I've tried to get them, but there's also desires that are good. Like you desire to have a good marriage. You desire to have godly children. You desire to bless the church. You desire to give to the poor. Like you can have a good desire. And so that's where it starts. There's something that we want, good or bad. Then the second step is we elevate the desire, and instead of it just being a desire anymore, it becomes a demand. So if we elevate the desire to a demand, then it becomes an idol. So I have a desire to give to the poor, therefore I demand that you give to the poor. I have a desire to have hymns every Sunday. Not bad desire. Sounds like a preference. But now I'm going to demand that you, JJ, lead 2 hymns every Sunday. That's now become an idol. Now you're worshiping the hymn instead of God. You're worshiping the sacrifice instead of the one you're sacrificing to. So once your desire leads to a demand, it becomes an idol. And then this leads to judgment and condemnation of others. Oh, I give to the poor, but you don't. I sing 2 hymns every Sunday, but you don't. Now you're judging other people based on that desire that has grown to an idol. And then finally, we can turn our judgment to punishment of other people to force our demands. And there's a lot of ways that you can punish somebody. What are some ways you can punish somebody?
Isolate.
Isolate. What else?
There's many, I guess, I think it amounts to demeaning them in some way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Showing anger towards them.
They're
Correcting
nitpicking things they do.
Nitpicking.
Yeah.
Taking money or time. Somehow, some way. I heard about a pastor. This is embarrassing. His church and him were in conflict. The people stopped tithing. And they said out loud, we're going to starve him out. Because if they didn't tithe, he wouldn't get a paycheck.
The whole church decided on
Yeah,
that.
they all, well, not everybody, but a big group of them conspired together to do that. They're like, oh, he says that he's staying, no matter, that he's going to stay and wants to work it through. He's not going to stay if we stop paying him. So let's just stop tithing. And they had half the church stop tithing. And it worked. 6 months later, he left because he couldn't, he wasn't getting paid. It's like, that's punishment. Anything we do to try to get even is one way to think of punishment.
Yeah.
Anything we do to try and get even. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So far till break, oh man, we still have 12 minutes. I thought that was going to go to 10:30. We started early. I guess I need to start the next spot because Pastor Joel told me we need to take a break at the same time so that we can do breaky things together. Okay, I'll keep going. So what we've done so far is just generally talked about managing conflict. What are some things that cause it? What are some things to be watchful for? And all of this. What we're going to talk about now is some specific things to do in these 4 areas. When it comes to these 4 different things, how can we, the responses are different. Like our response to a conflict over sin is going to be different than a difference of opinion and, a change that happened that caused conflict. So I want to talk about those different things from my experience as a pastor who's been through all of this. Is like, okay, here are some things that we can do. Now, what you're going to see is for each one of them, I'm actually going to combine sin and dynamics. Even though I understand that dynamics aren't always a sin, like just failure to communicate, it feels like a sin because like you didn't talk to me. Or like another dynamic is like you didn't budget money for something. Like that's not a sin to not have the money available. It's a dynamic that caused the conflict. Like we needed money, but it isn't a sin, but it kind of has to be dealt with like it is a sin. Like, I'm sorry I didn't communicate. That was horrible. Like I have to apologize like I sinned. And what I did was I have an offense against them, but it wasn't sinful.
Well, if they did it to punish or
Yes.
control or whatever.
Yes, then it could be sinful if it was oppressive or punishment. But if it was just an error, it's not sinful, but it still hurt. And it's like a sin, And I could take the posture, well, I didn't sin. What's your problem? What I did wasn't a sin. But then I'm not glorifying God. I'm not creating peace within. I'm not getting the log out, right? So sin and offense actually are really similar in how you have to deal with them. It's just hard. It's really hard, I'll tell you, for me. It's really hard to treat something that wasn't a sin like it was a sin. Because it's like, I don't have to apologize for that. It wasn't a sin. But
like technically I didn't do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what you say to yourself. And I deceive myself when I say that because I did do something wrong. I really did. Okay, so I'm going to put those 2 together, sin and dynamics, but opinions and culture we'll talk about and change we'll talk about. And then within each of those, I'm adopting a mindset in my ministry that as a leader, God has prophetically prepared me to deal with things before they happen. But sometimes I also have to respond after things happen. And so one of the things I'm endeavoring to do in my ministry is to look for opportunities to prophetically deal with stuff before it happens so that it doesn't happen, or so that it does happen, so that good things do happen ahead of time. And I'm asking God to show me. Like, it's a strategic part of my prayer, part of my ministry, part of the way I'm leading my team is like, when we pray, we need to ask God for a prophetic vision of the next 6 months, because there are things that God could instruct us to do now that we would go, what? Okay, we'll do that. But 6 months from now, we'll be like, oh, I am so glad God told us to do that. Amazing. Because something didn't happen or something did happen as a result. Are they in a break? Didn't it seem like something changed?
Yes, it did.
Are you guys in a break? We were like, it's time for us to break, but it's not 10:30. And then we heard the change. Yeah, they're in a break too. No, let's do it together. That's perfect. We're actually at a stopping point. Yeah, conflict resolution. You got a problem with it?
A good one. That was a good one.
Resolve it. No, it's so heavy. I think it was over here too, wasn't it? It was getting heavy over here. We were talking about suicide in Europe. Oh, we were? Yeah, so we were like, oh, we need to think about Cheetos and Diet Pepsis. Yeah.
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper, yeah, that's what I'm
We
doing.
went to a church in Missoula when we lived there. We'd only been there a couple weeks, and the pastor stood up and said, there's a person in this church who decided to leave his wife and has been confessing that he wants to reconcile, but he has been hitting on every woman in the church. And we've gone through him this time, and he refused the time, and he refuses to stop. And you are treating us as an unbeliever, and he's leaving.
Yep, that's church discipline.
And half the church got up and walked out when he said that. I mean, it was a shock to us because we'd never seen anything like that, but I mean, I had met the guy.
Yeah.
He was right, the pastor was right, in what he
Yeah.
was saying, but it was a shock. And he quoted the scriptures, he did it all. It was
Yep. So far for me, I haven't had to deal with that because they've left themselves, so I didn't need to tell the church. Okay, I'm supposed to stop the recording. We are going to take a break. The class next door broke, so we're stopping too. Welcome back. We had a break with ourselves, and now we're going to look at some different ways to interact around sin and dynamic caused conflict. Before break, I said that these are similar, actually, even though some dynamics aren't a sin all the time. We kind of have to treat it like it is. Okay, this is going to seem really trite, but later it will be more more in depth. So prophetically and responsively, how do we deal with sin conflict before there's a conflict? Do not sin. Don't sin. You can keep your sin from bringing conflict to your relationships by not sinning, which is a lot easier to say than to do, right? So do not sin. And as far as it goes to dynamics are things like, what did I say over here? Manipulation, control, stress, communication, unclear expectations, managing of resources, competitiveness in the environment. Like, those are dynamics that aren't necessarily sins, but they create conflict because resources weren't allocated or somebody's being manipulative, although manipulation is pretty close to a sin. So what we have to do, as far as it depends on us, is live or manage the dynamics of our lives for biblical community. So that's what the blanks are there on page 2, is do not sin and manage dynamics for biblical community. And so Jesus gives us those instructions, right? He says, do not lord over those that are in your care like the Gentiles do. Paul says to serve one another in love. So that's what our mindset has to be, is I am going to manage the dynamics for this biblical community. And I can make sure that we communicate with people. I'm the one who can make sure we do all of these things. And I'm going to talk more about those dynamics as we go through with the other ones, actually. Because the act of prophetically leading change is how you manage the dynamics for biblical community. Like that is those dynamics. So we'll talk about them more. This first one seems really trite. Do not sin, manage dynamics for biblical community. Okay. But when there is a sin or dynamic caused conflict, we move from prophetic to response. Like it's happened. Somebody sinned. Somebody did something to offend us. And Jesus has the greatest chapter on how to resolve offense and sin in Matthew 18. We've already talked about it, but let's read it. Matthew 18, verse 15 through 35. And we can break this up like we did before. Would all three of you read? JJ, you good with reading? You okay? Okay. I know not everybody likes to do that. So can you read 15 through 20?
15 through 20.
Yeah, and then we're going to keep going though. As we go through this, we'll keep going. And then can someone read 21, Peter's response through 29, 21 through 29? All right, thank you, Judy. And then Cyan, would you read 30 through 35, the end of the chapter? Yay. Josh and Kristen, follow along, Matthew 18, 15. Go for it, JJ.
Okay. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained a brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to even hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them.
Awesome. Let's just pause right there and then we'll read the other ones in a second. So, what is Jesus' goal for us to do in conflict?
So
If someone sins against you, he has this whole process, which I'm not really talking about the process, but he teaches 4 steps. What is the goal of the 4 steps?
for it to be resolved.
Right?
In fellowship.
To get them back in the, I love what it says. I don't know if it said it in your translation. I checked out for just a second, but in the ESV, it says, if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. One translation says you have won your brother. Like if the person sinned against you, you feel like you've lost, right? But if you are able to reconcile this, then you've won them. You've got them back. It's like a prize. You've preserved this relationship. And so Jesus wants us to win them. That's the goal of this whole thing, is to win your brother back, gain them back, reconcile. Some people think that the goal of this is to prove they're right. Judy confessed to that at the beginning of class. I'm with you. I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram, which is right. Do things that are right. Yeah, and like I have this tendency to go, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to show you that I'm correct, But God has helped me, and his word confronts my tendencies. And like, no, Brad, your goal is not to be right. I mean, you're going to do the right thing, but your goal is to win your brother back. Now, did you notice the 4-step process? Number one, negotiate with them one-on-one. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between him and you alone. So many people skip that step. Somebody sins against them, and it's you and the internet. And you don't even actually talk to them. The one person who can do something about it. And what happens is the second you do that, and you include other people instead of only you and them, you've now created the sin of dynamics. You, who were sinned against, have now changed the dynamics to an unbiblical footing where you've brought other people into it before they should be in it. And now it's harder to resolve the conflict. You've made the conflict harder to resolve because when it was just that the person lied to you, it's just you and them that have to get that resolved. And if you can go to them and be like, hey, you lied to me and I believed you and I did this and this and this because of what you said and it wasn't true. And I'm sorry. You're right. I did. I lied. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I blah, 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 blah. You know, they go through what we're going to talk about later, how to make an apology. And you're like, wow, thank you for owning that. I forgive you. And now it's over. But the second you post about it, or you tell your friends about it, or you tell your small group about it, or you do anything to bring anyone else in, now when you go to talk to them, they're like, you gossiped about me. See, you just made it worse to resolve the problem. The other thing you've done is if they apologize to you, you've now included 30 other people who don't know that they apologize to you. So what are you going to do? Go back and tell them? Probably not, because that's going to make you look bad that you gossiped about it and now they're apologetic. You want to cure that relationship. And I've seen this happen so many times that the original sin was bad, but it was the response that caused the split. Where if somebody had just done step one, Jesus says, go to them one-on-one alone and talk to them.
So then is not doing anything, is that considered sin?
Is that sin? I mean, you're in denial at that point if you're not going to do anything. That's when you go to flee suicide, right? Because you're on that denial slope. The other one that I was talking about was the attack slope, but we're talking about the godly one, which is you talk to them about it. You negotiate. You try to come to terms with them. That's step one. And then he says, if they don't listen to you, what's step two?
Bring 2 or 3 other people in.
Yeah, 2 or 3, not 30 or 70 or 1,000 or all of the Twitterverse, right? You just bring 2 or 3 people to help you arbitrate. That's what arbitration is. Okay, so you see, this is Jesus' teaching is supporting what we just talked about. And then the third step,
The church.
if they don't listen to you, bring them to the church, the gathering, the assembly, the group. And that is arbitration. Bring it to the church and let the church decide. You bring it to the church and the church is like, no, Brad, actually, you're the one who's in the wrong, not them. Because
So
you did this and that.
Church, does that mean the board?
Yeah,
It doesn't mean.
And-
It doesn't mean the congregation.
it can mean the congregation. Yeah. It depends on a church's structure. But bring it to the assembly, not just 2 or 3 people now. You're bringing it to the whole group. Yeah, the word for church there is the assembly, the group. And the church is led by elders and pastors. And yeah, even in Acts, I mean, Jesus is talking before the church is born and the Spirit falls. So right there, he's just saying, bring it to the group. Yeah, the group that you're in, the community. And what happens if he doesn't listen to the church?
Then
Step 4.
let him be like a heathen and a tax collector.
Yeah, they're a sinner outside the church now. We got to win them to Jesus. They need the gospel. We got to evangelize them like they're lost, you know. They're no longer in fellowship with us as brothers and sisters in Christ. But what do we do for Gentiles and tax collectors? We love them. We try to win them to Christ. I mean, you're still trying to win them. You're just doing it not in fellowship with them anymore. Sorry, I have a doorbell at my house that when someone walks by the camera, it ding dongs. So my kids and wife are coming and going from home today. Sorry about that. So Jesus's 4-step process is the process of biblical redemption that we outlined. Biblical responses, the solid ground. Overlook minor offenses, negotiate, forgive, mediate, arbitrate, church discipline. One-on-one, 2 or 3 witnesses, then the group, then you banish them. I'm using banish pretty aggressively there, but okay. Then Jesus tells a parable. I don't remember who's reading next. Because Peter doesn't like what Jesus is saying about this. He's like, wait a second. 21 through 29, yeah.
Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Jesus said to
Hold
him,
on. Do you know why 7 times? 7 is the number of perfection, completeness. In Revelation, there's 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. Like the number 7, like a whole week is finished. 7 days in a week. We might say it like this, like if we're like, man, I have to go all the time, 24/7. Right? We don't really mean that we worked 24 hours for 7 days. We mean we worked completely. We finished it. We did all of the work. And so the number 7, even today, still means a number of completion, like all the way till the end. So when Peter says, how many times should I forgive him? 7 times? Like that's all the times in Peter's mind. But listen to what Jesus says.
Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. For the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his masters commanded that he be sold, and his wife and children and all that he had, and that payment be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave the debt. Oh, but the servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe me. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, Have patience with me, and I will pay you all.
You guys have probably heard sermons on this passage before. 10,000 talents is how much the first guy owed. 10,000 talents is the equivalent of an entire nation's annual expenditures. So it's not a small amount of money. And depending on, how you do the math, trying to translate that into modern times, I don't know. But like say it's equal to the entire amount of money that the state of Idaho spends in a year. It's billions. It's unimaginably huge. And then it says he went to he found another servant that owed him 100 denarii. That's like a week's wage. So this guy owed a massive debt, and the person who owed him was a small debt in comparison. Okay, just to have that in mind.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But he refused. Instead, he turned away and had the servant put into prison until he would repay what he owed. The other servants who worked with him saw what had happened and felt very sad. They told their master the whole story. Then his master sent for him and said to him, You evil servant, I canceled your entire debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you have treated the other servant as mercifully as I treated you? His master was so angry that he handed him over to torturers until he would repay everything that he owed. That is what my Father in heaven will do to you if each of you does not sincerely forgive other believers.
Awesome. So we could get into all the symbolism and all the activities that happen in this, but what do you think is the point of the parable? Peter said, how many times should I forgive? 7? And he said, no, 70 times 7.
So there's no limit.
Okay. And then he tells this story. What's the point? Why tell the story?
See, I always get distracted when I read this because it's at the point where the others saw what was happening and went to their master and said, Hey, look what's going on. And I understand the forgiveness part, but that part, what does that mean for us? Are we just supposed to pray when we see something? Are we supposed to do something when we see something? You know, even if we're not part of the conflict?
Yeah.
Because those that went to the master were not part of the conflict.
Yeah. But they were part of the group.
They-
Yeah. They saw the wrong that was being done. The master had mercy, but this one who received mercy isn't merciful. So what's Jesus trying to say with this parable?
Forgive over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
You gotta work things out. You gotta keep going. Gotta, like, God has given you mercy for your whole life. Couldn't you give somebody mercy because they lied, took some money, forgot to communicate, didn't include you? Can you forget? Could you resolve that with them without making it worse? By holding them, keeping them, punishing them, attacking them, or withdrawing from them on the other side? Can't you do that?
See, this doesn't fully answer it for me. Because it's saying what you're supposed to do in your feelings and actions. But if they don't do it. you do
Isn't
it.
that the truth? Because what is Jesus concerned about? You. I mean, he's concerned about them, but that's them. You're not going to be able to control them. And as far as it depends on you, live at peace with each other. And if your brother sins against, or if your brother has a speck in his eye, take the log out of your own eye first. Like, Jesus' instructions are always for us to deal with us first.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, there is a message in here to the person who steals, who does wrong. Repent. But there's also a message that we have to forgive. And there's a lot of people walking around in the world who their conflict is because they won't forgive.
I think it affects your whole life.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think that is the point of the parable. And I agree with you. It doesn't answer the whole story, but I think that's the point, isn't it? You are the one who's responsible for you.
Yeah.
So you just got to deal with your part of it. And then the other people watching, they're going to tell the master. They're going to cry out to the master for justice. But you take care of your part. Own your side of this. And I think that's what Jesus meant. That's my third question. So maybe I'm getting ahead. What do you think Jesus meant? When he very first gave the teaching, he said, if your brother sins against you, go to him. And if he listens to you, you've won your brother. If he doesn't listen to you, then bring 2 or 3 witnesses. If he doesn't listen to you, bring the church. If he doesn't listen to you, kick him out. So what do you think Jesus means when he says, if he listens to you or if he doesn't listen to you? What do you think that means? If he listens to you or he doesn't listen to you?
So if he listens to you, presumably he repents and you're reconciled.
You think that's what it means?
I don't know that that doesn't mean that there might still be consequences.
Okay.
And so if he doesn't listen to you, at some point in time, it's out of your hands.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Treat him like an unbeliever. What did Peter think Jesus meant? Peter wasn't really concerned about the guy not listening, was he? What do you think, JJ?
I think he was more concerned about like how many times to forgive him, like it says.
Yeah.
Because he was like questioning like how many times it was supposed to forgive him. Is there like a certain amount?
Bob or something.
Yeah. He's like, well, wait a second. If I go through this process, the guy might listen to me. He might apologize. How many times do I have to forgive him?
Yeah, because that, if he apologizes, does not necessarily mean there's a change of heart, a change of actions, a change.
Yes.
It just means he wanted to shut you up.
Right. His lips
Yeah.
said that he was sorry.
Yeah.
But how many times do I listen to his lips and he keeps on doing it before I stop forgiving him? I think that's probably the biggest problem that we have is like when somebody's actually like, I'm sorry. And then we're like, okay, I forgive you this time. American culture has a value that is expressed in an idiom that we all share. Fool me once,
Shame on you.
fool me twice. We don't even give 7 opportunities. Peter gave 7. It's like, how many times should I forgive him? 7. We're like, I forgive you 1 time. I am only, our American idiom is, I will only forgive 1 time. Because if you fool me once, shame on you. And I'll forgive you for that one. The second time, it's shame on me. Now I don't have to forgive you because I shouldn't have trusted you the second time. Shame on me. But Jesus confronts that. And that's why his story is more about forgiveness than it is about repentance. Because we are forgiven of so much. So much. So much. I remember, I don't know if it was just developmental or if it was spiritual, but I remember when I was in 8th or 9th grade and I was at the altar at my church praying and I realized what a wretch I was. Like, I am a horrible person. And what does God do to horrible people? Well, he drowned them in the flood. He had them beat by armies. Like, I deserved to die in that flood. That's what I deserve because I'm a horrible person. But God didn't kill me in the flood. God had mercy on me. And that was so transforming for me as just a young man. It's like, I'm actually not worthy. I'm actually not a beautiful person. I'm not actually a wonderful thing. I'm a horrible thing. But God still forgave me, didn't drown me. And that gives a lot of freedom for us with other people. Because it's like anything that they do to me, I'm capable of doing. And God forgave me. So I could probably forgive them of what they did to me. It's amazing. Okay. So the question, what do you think Jesus meant when he said, if he listens to you or if he doesn't listen to you? That conversation we had leads us to this next step. So remember, this is a responsive. How do we respond when there's been a sin? Okay. I love this. This is the 7 A's of a genuine confession. This didn't come from your book. Your book has 5 things about a confession. This one is 7. So I wanted to share this one with you because I think it's really good. So Judy mentioned a second ago, when our lips say we're sorry, but our actions don't. That's why there's 7 steps, because part of this is our lips, but part of this is our actions. And I'm a parent, so I say it to my kids, it's like, okay, I'm glad you're sorry, but your actions need to change if you really are sorry. Like if you're sorry for hitting your sister, stop hitting your sister. Show us that you're sorry for doing that because it's bad. Okay, number 1, the first A is address everyone involved. So if this was a sin that happened one-on-one, then you only need to talk to that one person. A few years ago, we had a lady on our worship team, and this was back early in the days of our church when I was doing everything. Before our church had grown very much, we're still like 60 people. And so I had all the background in media and technology, and, I was trying to elevate what the church did. And so I was doing a lot of things. One of the things I was doing is I was helping the volunteers run the media during church, but I was also preaching. So I couldn't do it during church, but I could do it during practice. And so during Sunday morning practices, while the worship team was practicing, I was working with the media team. And there was this woman on the worship team who was just, was mean. And like she would say mean things to people on the worship team. And she just had an attitude. She'd roll her eyes and she was kind of demonstrative in her gestures. And she would be dismissive of people with her gestures. And she would turn her back and like shrug and scowl and just make faces. And so she was new to the worship team. And the worship leader had invited her and included her and everything. And so I'm sitting back at the media booth and I'm just watching this week after week after week. And I'm starting to hate this girl. But I never confronted it. Like I just was like observing it and like building up this attitude. Well, then this one Sunday, we had this teenager helping with sound, and somebody asked for something in their monitor or some change on the equipment. And the person made the change and it did a feedback, you know, when the sound system goes. And that woman on the worship team stomped her foot, threw her hands up, and just had this huge explosive reaction to this mistake. Like the kid just made a mistake. He was new at media, young. Somebody asked for a change. He gave him the change and it just did it. Like they didn't target her. Like it was just this honest mistake. And she blew it up so bad. And then I blew it up so bad. I turned the sound system off. I got mad. I was so angry. Turned everything off, got the entire room's attention because I have a loud voice. And I yelled at her across the entire room in front of everybody. And I scolded her. And I told her, I said, you just stomped your foot. You overreacted so much to just an honest mistake that this teenager made. And you're an adult woman. Like I went after her for like a minute. She put her mic down and left. Went home. Didn't stay for service. Oh boy, I blew it. Now, what she did was inappropriate. It was a dynamic thing. And I've learned that she just is one of those people who has a scowl on her face. Like she just has a scowl on her face all the time. She's also very blunt and abrupt and has a strong opinion about everything. So that's just who she is. But I wronged her too. So I went and apologized to her. But because I did it in front of everybody, I had to address everybody. And so the next Sunday at music practice, I was like, hey, before we start today, I need to talk to everybody. And there was a couple of people who weren't there because they weren't scheduled. You know, they were scheduled the week before, but not that week. And because the offense was in front of all of those people, then the confession and apology had to be in front of all of those people. So what I did that Sunday actually is immediately after church, I went to her house and I stopped and talked to her husband and her, and I asked for her forgiveness and I apologized. And I said, I'll never do that again. Like that was totally, and I told her what I did. I said, over the last few weeks, I've noticed that you do that kind of stuff. And I just kept holding on to it. And I was getting angrier and angrier. And like, I didn't like you because you did that. So when that happened, I already had like a few weeks of tension built up inside of me that I shouldn't have had. And so, you know, I confessed to all of that. And that's the next. Yeah, I didn't have it that day. And you know what? I think it affected our church. I think there was probably 6 months where spiritually we took a step back because I did that. Like it hurt my worship team. They didn't trust me because they were watching. They're like, what happens if I react to something? Is Brad going to scream at me in front of everybody? Right? They saw it. I think I even lost, if I remember right. I think one of my media people just stopped coming and I never knew why, but I bet it was because of that. So you got to address the group that it happened in front of. So if a pastor has a moral failure, usually the whole church hears about it because that's it. Everybody's affected by that, you know? And so there's some things that don't affect a big group of people. So whoever it affects, you know, if we had a youth leader who threw a flip-flop at a kid because he was mad and he yelled an expletive, and only the boys' small group saw it happen. So the apology happened to the boys' small group because they were the ones who saw it. And we told the boys, don't talk to other people about it. The other people aren't involved. Don't gossip about it. We're going to get, when it happened, we talked to him right away. Said, don't gossip about it. We're going to talk to him. We need to work it out between this group and him. And it was one of the youth leaders. So he had, like me, he had gotten upset because a kid was irritating him all the time. And the kid took off his flip-flop during small groups, and he decided to use the kid's flip-flop and hit him, throw it at him. So, yeah. So whoever is involved in the sin or offense or dynamic needs to also be involved in the confession. Number 2, avoid if, but, maybe I offended you. Well, if this didn't happen, then I wouldn't have done it. I did it, but.
You deserve it.
So a sincere confession acknowledges the log in your eye without if, but, and maybes. So don't try to excuse it. Just own it. And you don't have to exaggerate what you did either. You don't have to make what you did worse than it actually was, but you have to avoid those excusive kinds of things that try to diminish it. Number 3, admit specifically to what you did. Haven't you ever heard people say, I'm sorry if I offended you? It's better to admit specifically, I'm sorry that I said something that was, whatever it was, minimized or dismissive or angry at you. And just specifically say what your attitude was and what your actions were. And one of the things that has helped me is when I confess to my attitudes, not just my actions. So that woman that I sinned against by screaming at her in front of everybody, I didn't just say, I'm sorry I yelled at you in front of everybody. I said, I'm sorry that I allowed myself to develop that sort of opinion about you. Like, I didn't like you the last few weeks because of how you were acting. And so obviously I got mad, and I let that build up over time. And that was my attitude that did that. I did that.
So 2 questions for that. Did that change her actions?
She never came back on the worship team, but she has gotten gentler. But she's a rough person. She needs to. She's never apologized for what she did. She still hasn't, and it's been 10 years.
So the other question is, if somebody is apologizing to you and they're using the "if I did it" type thing, what's the appropriate response?
Oh, from the other side?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to own your own self as far as it depends on you.
So if somebody says, if I offended you, you say, yes, you did offend me.
Yeah, that was offensive.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that. Number 4, acknowledge the hurt you caused. This is, I think, weep with those who weep. I know that I allowed this attitude and this action to happen. I'm sorry that embarrassed you. Because that's what I did to this woman. I embarrassed her in front of everyone. So that was a lot of hurt. And am I sorry that I embarrassed her? Or am I happy that I embarrassed her? Right? I need to weep over that because she was embarrassed. And I did it. I embarrassed her. So acknowledge the hurt that you caused and be specific about that too. And if you don't know, ask them. Like, I know that what I did hurt you. Could you help me understand how it hurt you? And then they say it. They say, well, you embarrassed me. And you go, oh, I see. Yeah, that is embarrassing. I'm sorry I embarrassed you. And that way you can weep over what they're weeping over. Number 5 is accept the consequences. And this is where an apology really becomes verifiable, is when a person is like, what do I need to do to make this right? And that's what I asked that woman. I was like, what do I need to do? I know that what I did was wrong. So what do I need to do to make it right with you? I have to, is there anything that I can do? And her response was, there's nothing you can do. That's what she said to me. She was mad. So, and she's never apologized, but I'm at peace with it. So, you know, if you wreck someone's car, you pay for the car. If you break someone's window, you buy them a new window. She said your window's my window. You know, like we know this with our kids. I do as a parent. Like, oh, you broke your sister's device. You got to help her get a new device, whatever it is. So, what is it that you have caused damage to them, and like how can you make it restitution for it? The example I gave of my friend Sean, you know, he had to expose his life to his wife's microscope to rebuild trust with her. And that was the consequences of his pornography addiction. Like he can't just go, well, I confess, I've said I'm sorry. Why do you need to check my phone every day? No, his attitude was, have you checked my phone today? I want you to check my phone because I want you to learn that you can trust me again. I did bad and I need you to trust me. I want you to trust me. And so he had to accept those consequences. And I'm sure it was shameful and embarrassing and humiliating that his wife had to check his phone every day, but he did a humiliating thing. Okay. So number 5, accept the consequences. Number 6, alter your behavior. Like do different. I don't yell at people across the sanctuary anymore. And I talked to other people. It's like, what should I have done in that situation? It's like, what I should have done was when I first noticed her being like that, I should have not gone to a slippery slope. So what happened is I went to this side and I was in denial and I just observed and I was not confronting the situation. And then when the feedback happened, I litigated it right in front of everybody. I didn't even think about that until now, but so you got to change. You got to do something different. You got to show that you're really repentant. You got to be transparent. You got to open up. Your behavior has to change. And that's how you demonstrate that you really are sorry. Now, that's not talking about their forgiveness, you know, and if they should forgive me again, 70 times 7, like it is me owning my stuff and being responsible to God for Brad. And then the number 7 thing is to ask for forgiveness. Ask for forgiveness from those you've wronged. This is powerful. So many times people say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said those things.
I won't do it again.
And will you forgive me? Like just ask that at the end. You've gone through all of this. I'm sorry I did this. I did that and that and that. I know it hurt you in this way. I will not do it again. I'm going to do these things instead next time. Will you forgive me? That's the last thing. Ask them. And then it lets them have the opportunity to say, yes, I do forgive you, or no, I don't forgive you. But as far as it depends on you, you've committed to the changes, and you still should make the changes whether they forgive you or not. That's not on you. And their unforgiveness doesn't give you permission to continue in your sin. Like you've got to take care of you. Now, the author of this, he said he one time gave a perfect 7A apology to his wife for forgetting to bring something home from the grocery store. And she goes, that sounds like a perfect apology, but it's not very sincere.
I like it.
And he said she was right. Like, just because you know these 7 things and can say them,
Doesn't mean you do.
yeah, it doesn't mean you mean it. And guess who stands before God, whether you mean it or not? You. So I love what Paul says about communion. Each one must examine himself. And that's what you have to do in these things. It's like, am I being responsible for me? Okay, so those are the 7 A's. What does your textbook say? I think it's question 49 in your study guide. What are the 5 steps of a confession? I want you guys to know this one on the test. And it's only 5 where the one I just shared was 7. So do a little comparison.
Oh, it's 48. Confessor must own the problem specifically.
Oh, it's 48. Sorry, correct that.
Sinner must confess the sin completely. Once sin is confessed specifically and completely, the sinner must humbly ask for forgiveness. Sinner should state a commitment to turn around, and when circumstances warrant it, ask the body for help to change.
Yep.
And sinner should make restitution immediately.
Yep. So the 2 things that are missing from that one that are in the one I shared with you is include, address everyone involved, get all the people together. And then the last step is say, will you forgive me? Oh, well, I guess that's C, isn't it? Ask for forgiveness humbly. It's looped in there. Don't miss that one on the test. Okay. Change caused conflicts. So this isn't sin or dynamics. It's not something that you did. It's a change that happened. And a lot of times change creates conflict for people because they don't like when things change. And this isn't a class about change. Maybe someday I'll be able to teach a class called Leading Change, like how to help lead change, which would be a good class. This is more about the conflicts, but I think leading change well helps minimize conflicts. And when you create, this is one of those situations, I think, where it's a prophetically, remember, prophetic is like dealing with it before it happens. If you can lead change well before there's a conflict over the change, you can almost completely eliminate the conflict. Not completely, but almost. Because people will still be upset when things change. Like everybody loves to get a new iPhone, but they also hate it. Oh, they changed stuff. Oh, that button's not in the same place it was. Like all the things. The camera is different, whatever. So prophetically, we're going to try and lead change well to keep conflict from happening. But then there's also some stuff that we can do responsively if the change that we caused makes conflict happen. Okay, so prophetically. We're on page 3 now. Yay. Page 3. Prophetically dealing with change cause conflicts. Number 1, start early and ask for prayer about the change. So if you're a leader and God is stirring in your heart that a change needs to happen at your church, whatever it is, like adding a new song, changing when times of services are, adding a second service, changing the name. I just led our church through a name change last year. I can use that as an example as we go through this, is start early. So our name change technically happened. We had our grand opening September 15th, just a few weeks ago. 3 years ago at a board meeting, I told the church we're going to change the name. Will you pray for me? Pray for us as we decide what name to change to. And over the years, I kept telling them. Then at a board meeting, or not board meeting, at the annual meeting in 2023, a year before it, I said, next year's annual meeting, we're going to vote on a new name. I don't have the name to give you right now because we're still thinking about that. If you have suggestions, make them. And then we collected suggestions, we prayed over it, and we went through a whole process. And then in March of this year at the annual meeting, 2024, we voted for a change and it was unanimous. Everybody voted in favor of it. So we want to plant a church. We haven't yet. I've been there 13 years. But I say all the time, we're going to plant a church sometime. There's going to be a time in the future where we're going to plant a church. And some of the people we love and care for that are in this church are going to leave to go plant that church. Pray with us because God's going to do it. I don't know when, but he's going to. And so people are prepared for that change. I'm starting early. I'm telling them ahead of time, and I'm asking them to pray. And so when people start to pray for those things, if I feel like God has revealed it to me as the leader, then I have to trust that in prayer, God's going to show them too. and that their prayers are going to guide the timing of it. Like God's going to listen to those prayers, and I'm praying and they're praying, and God's going to bring us together in unity, and we're going to move forward. Now there's going to be people who, no, church, we shouldn't do that or whatever. Like, but I'm talking about us trying to help people along that way prophetically to keep conflict from happening. So start early. Number 2, allow input from stakeholders. So we're going to change the name. If you have suggestions, send them my way. What do you think the name should be? I mean, somebody put in there, Guiding Light Fellowship Church of Eagle, Idaho. That was their name suggestion. Thank you. No, we're not going to be Guiding Light Fellowship Church of Eagle, Idaho. Like, never. But they got to give their input. That person also gave a bunch of other names. Like they gave me like 7 names, but that was one of them. But I allow that input. People got to contribute. And stakeholders, you know what that word means?
They have an investment there. Something.
Right. They, at least they think they do. Yeah. Anyone who thinks that they have a stake in the change. And so, you know, if it's a change about the women's ministry, then you probably need to include all the women. Even if they come or not. Because all the women think that women's ministry is for them, even if they never come to anything. So include them. If it's the whole church, include the whole church. And allow input from them. When a few years ago, our church was district affiliated, which means that we weren't a sovereign church. So the presbytery here at the network office was technically the board of our church. And so we weren't independent. It's called a sovereign Assembly of God. So we went through the process to become sovereign. And I published the new bylaws that would make us independent like 6 months before the vote. And I had 3 meetings after church where people could come and give input or ask questions. The first meeting had 4 people at it. The next 2 had none. But people knew they could give input. And because I allowed input from stakeholders. And the number 3 is at those meetings, I explained. I went through the bylaw. I explained what was going to happen. I explained why we made decisions. And a lot of times people didn't think that it was bad or wrong. They just didn't understand. And so they're like, so why are we doing da-da-da? What's the reason for that? And then I'd explain it and they go, okay. Like they just needed to know. They didn't get it. They didn't understand. What is that? Is that my device? Something's ringing. Oh, you know what? I bet my daughter's Facebook calling me. She is. I don't know how to stop it. And it's going on my phone. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Now it's on here. Okay. So explain the changes thoroughly, and something in that process of explaining the change, the most powerful thing you can do is attach it to the vision. Align it to the vision, number 3. Explain the changes thoroughly and align it to vision. Like, what is the vision that we're trying to accomplish by making these changes? Because people want to know what it is we're trying to do. What's the future hold? Number 4, acknowledge the pain the change will cause. So right now we're getting close to needing to go to 2 services, but we've been a 1-service church for 13 years. So I've started early. And in 2023 on Easter, we did 2 services. 2023 Christmas, we did 2 services. And then we went back to 1. And then Easter of 2024, we went to 2 services, and then we went back to 1 the next Sunday. So our church has experienced it those 2 times. Then when we changed the name, that grand opening Sunday, we were expecting over 200 people. And so we're like, let's do a 2-service schedule again. We did it for 2 weeks because we're like, who knows? Maybe we're going to grow by 50 people when we make this change, and we'll need to be 2 services immediately. So we went to 2 services for the grand opening, and it was 205. So we had just a little bit more than 200, where Easter we had 250. And then the next Sunday we had 165. And so we're like, yeah, we're not ready. Because really 200's the number. We need to be over 200 to have 2 services. So I started early. People are giving feedback. We've tested it. We've tried it. But I'm telling the church, I know this is hard. Like when we go to 2 services, I'm going to know everybody because I'm going to be at both services. But if you only come to one, I know you're going to, like, your friends that you sit with right now aren't going to be at that service because they might be at the second service. And I know that's going to be hard for you. That's a tough thing to go through when your church goes to 2 services. And that's going to be hard. And just acknowledging that has given so many people peace because they're like, Pastor knows that this is going to be hard. Like, and we're trying to do things to help them with that. So we're having fellowship events. We're doing other things where you can stay connected to your friends. But acknowledging that pain and what it's going to cause is so helpful for people. Because if we're just like, let's stay positive, let's not talk about what's going to be hard, then they're in conflict now because they're like, wait, I'm sad about this. And you're saying we can't be sad about this. But as soon as I give them permission, it's powerful, so powerful. And then I think I mentioned this already. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Number 5, adjust the plan based on feedback. Remember how I told you about when I was changing the bylaws? When people came to that meeting, that first meeting, they actually made a couple of suggestions. And I got a few email suggestions. And we looked at those and we were like, those are good suggestions. That's a good idea. One of them was sort of indifferent. I didn't care. It was like, yeah, either way, like, I don't care. That's a good option too. And so we sent it to the attorney and the attorney didn't see any problems with it. And I said, so include them, make the changes. And we made like a half a dozen or more, 6 changes to those things in those 6 months before we voted on it. So here's what happened. After those meetings, after those emails, after the attorney approved it, I sent it out again and I said, hey, we're going to make this change. We're voting on it in March. You guys made some suggestions. Here's an updated version based on what you guys said. And so now not only did they get explained, not only were they included in giving input, but actually Pastor changed his mind. He had it one way and now it's this way because we gave input. And so people feel powerful about that. Like they feel like they're included. And so when you're bringing changes, pastor, leader, don't just think you have it all figured out. Present it, let people give feedback, and then change based on what they give. They might have a better idea than you do. One of the things that happened with our name change is I had already thought of the name Ascend Church, and I had it in my notes, but it also came in from suggestions. And so when I was able to say that we changed our name to Ascend, I was able to say, and a couple of you suggested that name. Now I had it on my list already, but it doesn't matter. They didn't know that. I didn't give them my list. So that was cool. You know, they feel like, oh, awesome. The 2 people who submitted that name know that they submitted it. Number 6, prepare the church for the change. So lead them in how it's going to happen. I love giving out timelines that say this is when this is going to happen, then this, then this, then this. So with the 2 service thing, I've told our whole church, they know now. We're going to go permanently to 2 services when we're averaging over 180 and we're having services of over 200 regularly. And we have 60 volunteers on Sunday morning. Because if we don't have 60 volunteers, we can't do it. No matter how many people we have. So they know that that's what it's going to take. And so when we get there, everybody will be ready for the change. Another thing you can do is make the change gradual, like I'm doing with 2 services. We're going to do 2 again at Christmas and 2 again next Easter if we aren't permanent. The other thing you can do is a trial run. Like, hey, you want to change the music style or want to change the stage or something. I have always used Christmas and Easter as an opportunity to make those changes. So I'll prepare people, I'll say what's going to do, and I'll be like, this Christmas, we're going to decorate and do something different. So you're going to see a bunch of changes on the stage. Like things are going to move around and it's going to be different than what you're used to. And we're going to try it for Christmas and see what we think. And you can do it for 5 weeks. Put the drums there, move the piano there, have the singers stand here, get rid of those chairs, the flag, the whatever's there that you're trying to change. And you can do it for 4 weeks. And then you can put it back how it was. And now they're like, oh, I could survive that change. You know, you're just leading them through it, giving them a trial run. And then prepare them for when it becomes permanent. And then number 7, make the changes, but humbly adjust as needed. We had a bunch, we wanted to get rid of a grand piano. And the reason was because it costs so much. You know how much it costs to tune a piano every 3 months? And then this piano was getting older, so it was going to need bigger repairs, especially at the rate we were using it because it was getting played all the time. So we were like, we should buy a keyboard. You don't ever have to tune it. You don't ever really have to repair it. I mean, it has a lifespan, but it'll be way cheaper. And you get all the benefits of a keyboard with all the extra sounds and different things you can do with it. So we were like, we need to buy a keyboard and get rid of this piano. Well, we knew people weren't going to be happy about that. So you know what we did? For 6 months, the piano sat on the stage with nobody playing it. And so it just became like, nobody's playing that thing. What's it doing up there? And then we recarpeted the stage. And so when we recarpeted the stage, we took the piano off the stage, but didn't put it back. So people saw the carpet go in. Oh, yeah. They helped after church. We're moving the piano off the stage. It's so heavy. We need everybody's help. So they helped move it down. And then it just never went back up. And it sat at the front for like a month. And then after a month of it sitting at the front, we had an event where we set up tables and it was in the way. So we moved the piano to the back. And then it sat there for a year. No one ever played it except for kids who would go and, sit and play with it. And after now, 2 years of the piano not being played on Sundays or at other services, we were able to sell it and no one even asked any questions. It was just gradual, led to the change, and it happened. And humbly, the thing that was humble about it was there. And if I was wrong that we actually needed that piano, then it was there. And we could be like, okay, we'll put it back up. Yeah, we did need it. Oops, I was bad. But in the end, I wasn't, So this is how you prophetically lead change without causing conflicts. It isn't foolproof. You still are going to get people mad. People are still going to be conflicted. But you've done a lot of work to minimize conflict. Now, what happens if you didn't, this is responsively, what happens if you didn't include an affected person in the process of change? Or what happens if you rushed a change without preparing the church for it? Have you sinned? Is it a sin to rush a change? Is it a sin to make a change without including someone who thought they should be included? It's probably not a sin, but you still should apologize like it is. So follow the 7 A's of a genuine confession and apologize sincerely for not including them or hurrying the change. So you make a change, you get rid of the piano, and then the Christmas group shows up and there's no piano. And there's been a piano for 7 years. And they're like, what happened to the piano? Oh, we sold it. What? You sold it? We've been using that piano for the last 7 years. Yeah, we didn't include you in that decision. That's bad. I'm so sorry. We totally disregarded you. And go through the 7 A's. You know what? If we make any changes about the music system, we'll let you know from now on. Even though you would just do this one thing a year, like we should have included you in that decision because we didn't think about that. I'm sorry.
So what's the word after or? We're not including them
Or hurrying. Or rushing the change. Yeah. So the way you respond to a change caused conflict is taking responsibility for what you've done. I'm sorry, I did that. And then they should forgive you. Or if someone else made a change without including you, then you should forgive them. They're going to apologize to you, be repentant. You're going to confront them, negotiate, arbitrate, mediate. And if they're like, I don't need to include you, what's your problem? That's when it may get to a point where you have to treat them like an unbeliever because they won't listen to you.
There could be times when you have to rush a change though, right? There could be.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But if it causes conflict with someone, you can still be sorry for that.
Yeah. and there-
Yeah. And weep with them because they're weeping over that change you hurried that they didn't expect. I'm just saying, as leaders, we need to take responsibility for being slow, preparing people, leading that change, including them. Like, we can't just go, I'm the pastor, deal with it. No way. This, for example, this 2-service thing, I think we should be in 2 services. I think we should be. But I have team members that are hesitant. I have congregation members that are hesitant. I think we would bust 200 by having 2 services. Like, it'll make more room. It'll have 2 times. Like, I think we'll grow because we went to 2 services, where they are all waiting for us to grow and then do 2 services. And guess what? I have my opinion, but I can't force that. Relationship is more important. And these are people I love and care for. And when they're ready, they'll let me make the change. But I think we should have done it. I think we should be in 2 services right now. We had 142 Sunday and it could have been 200, So we're getting there. So as a leader, we have to be prepared for that too. And that takes us to the last one, actually, resolving differences of opinion. I have an opinion that we should be in 2 services, but not everybody has that opinion. So how do we prophetically care for conflicts before there's a conflict when it comes to matters of opinion? So tell me if you can relate to this. I don't know how else to say it. If you have better words, that would be great. But I've been saying it this way for a while. I get inside my own head. That's what I say. I get stuck in my own head sometimes, where I think about a situation, I have an opinion about something, and it's in my head, and it's right and good. And sometimes I do that thing, and it wasn't right or good. It's like, how did I lead myself to that decision? Ugh, I got stuck in my own head. So this next thing I'm going to share with you are ways that I've discovered to unstick myself from my own head. Seek the counsel of others. So when you have an opinion that might cause conflict, you need to seek the counsel of others. So elders, staff, church leaders, like, hey, I think this. What do you guys think? So when COVID happened, I thought we should have never stopped having church. That was Brad's opinion. The day one, I was like, we can still have church. And if people want to stay home and stream it, they can stay home and watch online. But the rest of us don't have to stay home because I'm fine meeting in person. So I had that opinion, but not everybody had that opinion. But I sought the counsel of my team. I'm like, what do you guys think we should do? And they're like, let's do it for a couple of weeks. They say 15 days to stop the spread. Let's just do it for a couple of weeks and see. And we just slowly navigated it. But here's what happened. We only met online for 4 weeks. By Mother's Day, we were meeting in person. And by Father's Day, we were meeting back in the sanctuary. It was church again. Like, we were back so fast. I don't think we ever should have stopped. But I wasn't the only one whose opinion mattered. And number 2 on this list, I directed the decision. I'm the one, as the leader, who put it on the table. We need to decide, are we meeting in person or not? But I didn't decide without their input. Now, COVID was a forced change, so maybe this is a little bit of a change. But this was the best example I could think of, is the COVID thing, because there were lots of opinions about what to do. But I allowed my team to speak into it. And so I said something like to our team, I said, doesn't the Bible tell us to not forsake meeting together? Like, there's some people who want to meet. Am I wrong about this? And so one of my elders, many of you probably know him, Pastor John Wilkie. He was a missionary in Latin America. And he said, Pastor, I understand what you're saying. He goes, but I would just give you a different perspective. He said, when I was a missionary in Ecuador, there was one time where Ecuador was having a civil war. And there was like people were being shot in the streets because these two sides were fighting over who the president should be. And he's like, it was a war in Ecuador. And I couldn't have people coming to church in the middle of a war. Like just asking them to walk to the church would have put them in the middle of the battlefield. Like everybody was locked in their houses for 2 weeks because while this war went on. And he's like, we had to cancel church. And we told people, be safe, stay at home, pray for our country. If you need prayer, call us. Like we took care of the people, we did the thing, but we couldn't have them step out and go into the battlefield to come to church. And he's like, so I think it's okay to like not meet in the middle of this crisis. Like it'll be all right for a little bit. But then eventually everybody was like, this can't keep going on forever. You know, when 15 days became, we don't know when it's going to end. All of my team, not all, but most of them were like, yeah, we need to start doing whatever we can. So we met outside on the lawn for a while and then went inside by Father's Day. So, but I could be in my own head, like, there's no way we're going to stop meeting. There's no way we should do that ever. And am I wrong here? And then it gave people a chance to give input. Is there anything I'm missing? I'm going to make this decision. Is there anything I'm missing? And people gave their input. We did a survey to the church and they gave their opinions. Now that was a really big opinionated thing, but you can do that with small things. Ask people's opinion, whether it's about change or not change. So I've given my staff and my elders and recently the entire church. I said, if you ever think that I am stuck in my own head, it's a tendency of mine. Feel free to let me know. Come and tell me if I say something wrong or you think I have a wrong opinion. Like I can get stuck in my own head, so let me have it.
So it's the first 3 days under seat council.
Elders, staff, and leaders.
Thank you.
Those are the kind of people you're seeking counsel from. I don't know if it was wise of me to tell my whole church to do that, but I this year told my whole church they could do it. So far, nobody has. But I do have elders and staff who will tell me though. Yeah. I bought a pair of pants that my kids told me I should wear. And one of my board members came to me and said, Pastor, those pants don't look good when you're standing on the stage. They don't look good on you. And so I went and looked at the video and I heard what he said and I haven't ever worn those pants again. Even though my daughters are like, those are so cool. They're like ones that look like they're ripped. Yeah. But you know, you look at a almost 50-year-old fat guy wearing those jeans and it's like, yeah, that's probably not appropriate. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, people can say. Okay. The next thing is, board and staff decisions. Board and staff decisions are a place where opinions rule, right? Because you're making decisions about the church. It may not necessarily be changes. Like I'm not talking about leading a big change initiative, but like which curriculum are we using or how are we going to do this event or whatever? Where should we spend the money? So I just wanted to give you guys some tips that I've learned over the years on like how to foster an environment where people can share their opinions so that you don't end up in conflict eventually because your opinion has swallowed the day or something. Okay. And this is church conflict. So at my board meetings, the 4 Ds, and I probably should have left you more space. Sorry. 4 Ds are discover. The first thing we do with the board or the staff is discover what the decision is. We have to make a decision about this thing. And we research it, whatever we need to do to research it. Sometimes research is just having a conversation because we all know, but sometimes it's like getting bids, you know, from contractors to do the work or whatever, but you discover what the problem is and the ways that you can fix it. The second D, after you've done this discovery, is you discuss it. Okay, well, here are our choices. Let's talk about it. What are the different approaches? What's everybody's opinion? What would happen if we did this or that? What are the pros and cons? And you have this big discussion. The third D is decide. Make a decision. Okay, we've done this discovery. We've discussed it. What should we do? And then the fourth one is deploy. Like make the change happen, or not change, make the decision happen. Deploy. You might prefer delegate. Okay, we made the decision. Who's going to do it? Delegate it. It would still be 4Ds, but you'd use delegate instead of deploy, whichever one. So my board meeting minutes are laid out like this. Discover. Here are the things that we need to talk about. Decide. Here are the things, or sorry, discuss. Here are the things we need to learn about is discover. Discuss is here are the things we need to talk about. Decide is here are the things we need to decide. And here's what I do. Sometimes I can bring an issue to the board in discovery as the first step, but by the end of today's meeting, we're deploying it. We discussed it, we decided, and we're going to make it happen. And it's a quick decision, but everybody gets their opinion and we move the thing through that process. Sometimes I present it as a discovery and the board's like, I'm not ready to talk about this. I don't know yet. I got to look at this information. I got to think about it. I don't know. I don't have anything to say yet. It's too early. And so then we table it, and the next meeting it moves to discuss. And then we discuss it, we talk about it, we get to all of that. Okay, we have this decision to make. And they're like, I'm not ready to make a decision. I got to pray about it. Like, I hear what everybody's saying now. I see all the different perspectives, but I'm not ready to make a decision. And so then we wait till the next meeting. We had a conflict actually with our neighbors over irrigation water at the church. And we had some board members who wanted to send a letter from an attorney threatening them. And we had some other members of the board who were like, let's not get in a fight with our neighbors. We can figure this water out another way. We can apply to the state for a well. So then we could drill a well and then we could get irrigation water from the well. We don't want to fight with our neighbors. And I had board members on both sides of that. And so they had been discovering, they had been discussing, but we couldn't decide because it was like two different sides. And we kept that decision on the board meeting for a year before we made a decision. Because we couldn't convince each other of the right thing to do. And we ended up renting water temporarily with a well. But we didn't have rights to use it forever, but we could pay a rental fee. And these are things you don't know when you leave Bible college, but you can rent water from a well. And as long as you're paying the rent, it's entitled to you, but you can only do it 1 year at a time. And by the end of that year, we could have rented again for another year. We could have tried, but we were finally able to make a decision. And we sent a letter from our attorney to the neighbors, but the letter changed dramatically from the beginning to the end of that year. And we were finally able to settle that dispute with the neighbors over the irrigation. So I'm just saying all of that to say, like, it could take time to get through that 4-step process: discover, discuss, decide, and deploy it. Like, you might decide to do something, but not have the person to do it. Like, we've decided to plant a church, but we don't have somebody to plant a church yet. So we're waiting for God to give us someone to delegate that to. Okay, the next thing is trust the spiritual gifts of others to contribute to the decision. So that's what I was just saying. Like, when those board members, I thought we should send the letter from the attorney, but when those board members thought we shouldn't and that we should just figure out another thing, I had to trust the Spirit of God in them. Like, maybe God is using the spiritual gifts he's given them of being filled with mercy, because I'm not very merciful. Maybe that gift of mercy is what we need right now. So I'm not going to rush this. I'm not going to go ahead without them. Like, God's given them a spiritual gift of discernment to speak to this group too. And if they're not convinced, then we shouldn't do it. And again, remember, this is board and staff decision. So we're not talking about unbelievers. Like, this is church leadership. So trust the spiritual gifts of others. Number 3, unity over urgency. There has not been a decision yet in 13 years on my board that wasn't unanimous. There's been lots of discovery and discussions that weren't unanimous. But When we finally made the decision, everybody agreed. And that means that sometimes it slows things down. Like, we probably should have changed the name of our church 5 years ago, but I couldn't get unity on it. And so it took me 5 years to get unity. And so I chose unity over urgency. But guess what? Our church is healthy. It's strong. We're on purpose. We're serving together, and it's healthy. It's not conflict free, but it's conflict minimized. Do all of you know Pastor Doyle that was here before Pastor Joel?
I met him.
You met him? He used to say to pastors all the time, he'd always say to us at meetings and things when he was preaching or whatever, he'd say, if you ever say to your church, I'm the pastor and that's why, you've already lost. It's like, you can't talk like that. Now, I don't know what the superintendent knows, but he probably knows that there's pastors saying that. That's why he said that. Why is that? You're creating unnecessary conflict. Like, why are you picking that fight? Like, why are you pulling out that authority card? Everyone knows you're the pastor. And if you're like, and you know, parents can do this too. It's my way or the highway. I'm the dad. That's why. It's like, you are not, I'm your husband. That's why. Submit to me, woman. Like, you start talking like that to people, those dynamics are going to create conflict. And who started it? You. You're the one who's stirring up the conflict. So, you know, I tell you, avoid that. I did it one time with a girl named Jordan, a young adult in our church. She was helping me with a photography thing. And her and I disagreed. And I was like, I'm the pastor. If I decide to do it this way, are you going to be okay with that? Or are you going to fight against me because you disagree with me? I thought that I was being like negotiating with her. Like, how strongly do you feel about this? But that was the wrong move. So now what I say is if I had this to do over with Jordan, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, how strongly do you feel about this? And if she said 7 or higher, I would have said, fine, do it that way. Because I was a 7 in the way that I felt about it. My opinion about the photography thing was a 7. So don't say I'm the pastor, that's why, or I'm the women's leader, that's why, or I'm the worship leader, that's why. That isn't a good enough reason for your opinion to win. So, okay. The last one, model making decisions that are opposite of your own opinion. If I was the only one making this decision, I would prefer another option, but I understand my opinion isn't always the right opinion for the church. So I did this with a name change. I actually wanted our church to be a different name. Like, my opinion wasn't Ascend Church. I still like the other name better, but it wasn't the right decision for the church. And Ascend was in my top 4. It might even be my second choice, probably. If it was ranked choice voting, that would have probably been my second vote. But guess what? I led the church to change the name to Ascend, even though it wasn't my first opinion. And my staff and my board all know it. They all know that I prefer the other name, and they know what that name was because they were part of that decision making. The church doesn't know. None of them. I don't think I've told them. But my leaders all know. So what I did in that moment was I showed my church, this is probably the biggest decision this church has made while I've been the pastor, changing the name. And I didn't get my way. I took their way because I trust them and the Holy Spirit in them. And it isn't the wrong name. It just, I liked the other one better. I thought it was a better name. And I do think that it was the right decision to choose Ascend. I think that's the right decision for the church. And I told all of them that. I said, I think you guys are right. I think this is the right decision. But if I was the one making it all on my own, I would have chose the other name. And that's empowering because it's like, oh, we don't have to have conflict over these things. I mean, even pastor doesn't agree with the decision that we're doing. And he's not making a big deal. I didn't pull, well, I'm the pastor. We're going to do that name. Okay. Financial opinions. Don't try to hide your financial records. Oh my goodness. I don't know why we have pastors and leaders. They're like, somebody in my church wants to see the finances. What should I do? Show them. Why create tension over money when you can just show them what you're spending money on? Develop a budgeting process that includes people with opinions. If people have opinions about how you should spend the money, bring them on the team. Like maybe they can help you shape how you spend money, and you still get to cast the vision, you get to lead the team, but help them share their opinions. Be open to a fresh perspective on financials. Be open to a fresh perspective on financials. You know, you spend money one way, but maybe you shouldn't.
What is that? Members and congregations will support blank, will support what?
I don't know where you are. What page?
Write your financial opinions. Don't try to hide your records.
Members in congregation will support transparency. Sorry, I didn't say that sentence. Yeah. If you're transparent with your finances, then they're going to support you in spending your finances. It's when you start hiding things that they're like, I don't know why they're hiding things. There's a pregnancy clinic in Boise that our church used to give money to until I asked them for the financials and they wouldn't show me. And now I don't give money to Stanton Healthcare anymore because they wouldn't give our church, they wouldn't give me permission to see their financials. So I was like,
Yeah,
no.
well, that screams something.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're transparent, even if like you didn't spend money perfectly, people are probably going to give you the benefit of the doubt because you're like, yeah, here's what we did. You know, this is what we spend money on. Just let people see them. Okay. Last page, page 4. And we have 2 minutes till lunch break. 12 strategies for staying united when our opinions differ. I was going to have us read Romans 15:1 through 15:7, but that alone is going to take more than 2 minutes just reading it. So I'll just summarize it. And you can see it's all articulated there at the end of each sentence, which I thought might happen. So number 1, recognize if you are weak or strong. Remember, this teaching in Romans is about if a brother weaker in the faith says we shouldn't eat meat offered to idols, those of you who are strong in the faith, right? It's that whole discussion about an opinion about what to eat or drink and what days to celebrate. So determine if you're weak or strong in the faith. Like, where are you in this relationship? Are you the one that leans towards freedom or the one who leans towards stumbling block? Number 2, recognize if the conflict is between disputable opinions or moral commands. So this is where, are we in a conflict over whether Jesus is the Son of God, which is a moral command, or are we in a dispute about whether a jack-o'-lantern on Halloween is okay or not, which is an opinion? Like, one of them is a moral mandate from God, theological truth. The other one is like a disputable opinion, right? Should a woman be the senior pastor of a church? That seems like a disputable opinion. The Bible seems to say both. It's okay and it's not okay. Now, I have an opinion that a woman could be a senior pastor of a church, but I'm not going to lose fellowship over that with somebody. Like, if they think that a senior pastor shouldn't be a woman, that's probably not something I'm going to like die on. But if they say Jesus wasn't the Son of God, he was just a man, that's not a disputable opinion. Okay. So number 1, are you the weak or strong in this relationship? Number 2, is this a disputable opinion or a moral command? Number 3, refuse to hate those with different opinions. Okay. So now we're talking about opinions. We're not talking about moral commands. Refuse to hate those with different opinions. Like, I'm not going to hate you because you think that women can't be senior pastors. That's not worth me hating you. I don't feel that way about people who murder. Like, I'm not going to hate you because you murder. Like, no, that's not okay. You can't murder. I hate that. Number 4, leave judgment to God in these matters of opinion. Like, God's going to judge each person's heart. And so if one family thinks, having a jack-o'-lantern on Halloween I don't like that. That seems ungodly, and I'm not going to do that. Then let God judge. You don't need to judge them. Number 5, be fully convinced in your own mind. Did you know the Bible says that? Like when you have these opinions about things, like you got to explore that. Maybe you're wrong. So make sure you're convinced in your own mind of what you think. And then number 6, honor the Lord in your actions. So if you think this is what the Lord is asking you to do, then by all means, honor God and what he's told you to do. But that doesn't mean he's told other people to do that. Judge yourself before God. Like if God's shown you this way and given you an opinion about it, then you're going to have to judge yourself, but don't judge other people. Number 8, resolve not to be a stumbling block to others. So I know there are people in my church that have struggled with alcoholism and they finally are free of alcoholism. Should I serve alcohol at our bowling event for our men last night? Why would I do that? I mean, it was hard enough for some of them to be in a bowling alley just because there was alcohol there, let alone it being sitting on the table that they are free to drink. And I could have caused them to stumble. I have a friend actually who went to a Bible study at a pastor's house and he was offered alcohol and he's a recovering alcoholic.
That's illogical if nothing else.
It's like, what in the world? Don't cause someone else to stumble. Don't use your freedom because there are probably people who can drink without getting drunk, and they have to honor, like they have to talk to God about that if they don't get drunk. But why would you do that to someone who does get drunk, who is tempted in that way? We had a guy in our church who really struggled with sexual temptation. And at our men's summit, we went to the hot springs up in Cascade. And he came up to me and he's like, Pastor, I have to go to the car. I can't stay here. And I was like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm just dealing with something. And so he went to the car. So later that day, I talked to him. I was like, what's going on today? You seem fine now. And he's like, it was all those women in bikinis. My mind was wandering and I was having thoughts I didn't want to have, and it was causing me to sin in my heart. And so I had to leave. I had to get out of there. And so guess what? We don't go to the hot springs during men's retreat anymore. Like, I'm not going to do that to him if that's what's happening in his heart. Like, I'm not going to be a stumbling block. Number 9, pursue the nature of the kingdom. Look to what God is doing and try to build that. Like, don't let these differences of opinion be something that stop the kingdom work. Number 10, keep a quiet and clean conscience. Like when our opinions are different, I've just got to have a clean conscience myself about what God's asked me to do. And if he hasn't asked you to do that and it's just a matter of opinion, then why be in conflict with you over that? Like, just let it be. And like, there's people in our church who have a glass of wine at their own table. Fine, I'm not going to judge you, but I'm not going to do that. I have a clean conscience and they have a clean conscience. Number 11, please your neighbor and build them up. Like the goal in all of this should be to build each other up. Number 12, make unity and God's glory your focus, not winning this fight over an opinion. Okay, the last thing I have to share, and I hear Pastor Mike still going next door, so I have a little bit of a permission to do this. So those 12 strategies for staying united when opinions differ works fine when it's two equals. Like we're just people in a church, people in a pew, or like a pastor and a congregant, but it's like opinions about what to eat or drink or when to celebrate. It's fine to have that. But what if the senior pastor and the executive pastor at a church have different opinions about what to do with the church? The direction to go. It's lunchtime. Okay. We have like 30 seconds left. Two people in power and authority have a different opinion about what should do. Should we go to war or should we sign a peace treaty? Should we change the name or not change the name? Because like if we're the two pastors and we're going to lead this, but you and I feel very differently about it. But it's a matter of opinion. It's not right or wrong. It's not sin or not sin. It's just, man, I see it your way, you see it my way, but I still feel this and you still feel that. What should you do? Proverbs 18:18. The lots put an end to quarrels and decides between powerful contenders. Do you know what that means?
Cast the lot for it.
Flip a coin. And here's how you do that. You pray. You say, God, I don't know which direction we should go. I have my opinion. JJ has his opinion. You've put both of us in leadership at this church, and this isn't a sin issue. Hey, we're
That's
almost
right.
done.
You're
Thank you. Flip a coin. Heads, we're doing what JJ says. Tails, we're doing what Brad says.
Yeah.
And you leave it to God to guide the coin. And if we flip the coin and it lands on heads and we do what JJ said, and 6 months later, we're like, we shouldn't have done that. We made that decision. We stayed in unity. We're still brothers. We're still leading this church. And we both put our trust that God would guide that coin or not. And so we can stay in unity. We can stay in fellowship, even though one of us lost our decision. Like we didn't get our way. And then maybe we learn from it. Or maybe 6 months later, we're like, man, God was in that. Can you believe it? We flipped that coin and look what happened. I was wrong, man. JJ, you were right. It should have been your decision. Look what happened. All right. I have a friend who a relative who pastors a church in Utah. And that's how they choose board members. They nominate 2 people, they put them through the process, and they present 2 people to the congregation that both could be board members. And during the annual meeting, they flip a coin. Heads, JJ's the board member. Tails, Brad's the board member. And they just flip a coin. That way the church isn't voting someone in and someone out.
See, that way there's no
Popularity contest. Yeah, it was a coin.
Yeah.
And both of you would be qualified. Both of you could do it. You know how they picked the 12th apostle, right? When Judas killed himself in Acts chapter 1. They chose from among themselves men of good report who could be the 12th disciple, and then they cast lots for it and let the lots decide. So don't be afraid to use that in a conflict. Like I would do it if I was helping a husband and wife settle a conflict. Seriously, should we buy the house or not? And one saying no, one saying yes, and they can't come to agreement. I'm like, could we just flip a coin and let God direct the coin? And would you be able to live at peace with each other and lead your family knowing that you're trusting that God guided that coin? And it helps. My wife and I will do it. It's like, where should we go? Should we go to Taco Bell or Wendy's for dinner? Flip a coin. Why would we fight over this? Should we have a big disagreement in our family over dinner tonight? Because guess what? We get dinner tomorrow too. Jesus, bless our lunch and our fellowship. Lead us, God, to be people who make peace in our churches. We know the world is watching, and God, we want your glory to be on display as we settle disputes and make peace with one another. In your name, amen.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.